Good morning. I'll call to order the Placer County Board of Supervisors May 3rd, 2016 meeting, and we'll start with a flag salute led by Supervisor Duran.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jack. Our clerk will now read our meeting procedures.
Welcome to the Placer County Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, May 3rd, 2016. Agendas are available on the wall outside this meeting room. If you are here to speak on an issue not appearing on the agenda, you may do so during the public comment period. However, please note that the board is not permitted to take action on items addressed under public comment. All items on the agenda will be open for public comments before final action is taken. When you speak, clearly state your name for the record, and be aware there is a 3-minute time limit per speaker. Keep in mind that the chairman has a discretion of limiting the total discussion time on any item. Please place all cell phones in silent mode. If you are hearing impaired, we have listening devices available. Thank you for your participation and cooperation.
Thank you. Next is our consent agenda. This is a list of items to be considered all in one motion, but the board would be happy to pull any if anyone from the public would like one pulled and discuss it individually, or if any of my colleagues prefer. Looks like there are none. Pleasure of the board. Moved and seconded to approve consent. Roll call, please.
Holmes?
Aye.
Duran?
Yes.
Euler? Montgomery?
Yes.
Wygant?
Yes, thank you. Next is public comment, and I'm actually going to kick off public comment this morning. I want to let everyone know that today we're going to adjourn our meeting in memory of Kathy Lund, who passed away last week. She's a longstanding public servant from Rockland, city council member for over 20 years, and a great personal friend, so we'll be adjourning today in her memory. And then next, I'm going to kick off the reminder that today is the big day of giving, and we have a short video if you can refer to that.
Our region is a remarkable place where you can feel the pride growing all around us, bringing us together. And starting at midnight on May 3rd, we'll come together in an even bigger way for one big day of giving to support the nonprofits that lift up lives, offer food and shelter, and give us the good things that make us proud to live here. Because no matter what you love about this community, you can go to bigdayofgiving.org on May 3rd and put your money where your heart is. And together, we'll create a big impact, making our home, our place, our region proud.
So now I'm going to open it up to the public. This is the time when anyone from the public can make comments to the board on something that is relevant to Placer County's agenda, but not on today's agenda. So please come forward and state your name if you would like to do that.
On behalf of the people of Placer County, especially the site at 4133 Pleasant Hill Road, I want to thank Robert for having a meeting with us, and I want to thank EJ for having a meeting with us. The problem that we are having here that we're finding out throughout the whole county that I've on my personal investigation is that these sites were granted without any verification or input from us, the property owners of Placer County. I shared this information with various county officials and my supervisor. Thank you, Robert. They're in such a rush to get to approve this. I've got evidence here where this seems like it was just rubber stamped. You've got errors on these documents, especially the administrative approval. The exception verification really wasn't verified. As an example, I brought these cultural things that were found, artifacts that were found on or near the properties of concern throughout Placer County. What I'd like to know is why this verification wasn't put up to the public, why whoever did this investigation, in this case it was done by a Mr. Johnson, why he didn't come up with publicly disclosing, hey, we didn't find anything. This is especially sensitive, right, to us, Supervisor Durant. These leases are for 99 years. That means the people of Placer County have to contend with this issue for 99 years. Who are the people behind it? Verizon, big business. Florida companies that own these towers and then lease it out to Verizon. They bring their problems to us, so we have to deal with it. And Supervisor Holmes, we had a gentleman that was supposed to be here with me, but he couldn't make it. He was from your district. These things were all done without our permission. On a more personal basis, they came through my property on a road easement that clearly said this is for ingress and regress for private use only. Now we've got commercials. We've got neighbors fighting neighbors over these things here. We shouldn't be stuck with them. I'm almost done here. My health concerns are this. Why do the workers who work on these sites have these health monitors if there is no health risk? Does that make any sense? No. So we're going to be living next to these things 24/7. And if you look at the EPA readings, it says anybody who's within 400 feet, or excuse me, 400 meters, which is 1,200 feet of these towers, is in danger of, health risks such as cancer. My home is actually closer than the person who leased this tower out to that tower. It's within 250 feet. There has to be some kind of regulation that says that a residence cannot be within so many feet of these towers. Why did the county give permission? This is what I asked EJ, and he says these were all laws created by big business. I'm not saying you said that. I'm saying it. It was created by big business to further. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyhow, thank you for your time. I paid, the last question is, I've been paying taxes for 50 years. That's longer than most of the folks have been here in Placer County. And I will fight this thing. God bless America. I will fight this thing until the very end. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. And just so you know, I actually will be circling back with my staff as a result of our meeting, and I'll be learning a lot of the answers to your questions, and I'll get back with you.
All right, thank you. But I want the public to know what's going on. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Jack.
Yeah, where exactly are the properties?
The properties, I don't have the whole list, but I can give them to you later.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that question. Did you have one too? No? Okay, thank you.
See no other questions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Jennifer,
Quite coincidentally, a similar issue has
your
come up in my
light's
district.
not on, Jennifer.
Don't
Now it
know.
is. Okay, good.
Quite coincidentally, a similar concern has come up in the 5th District, and I'm actually meeting with county staff, I believe, this week to go through and understand what that process is for cell towers, both application and permitting. And it's something that I would like to see brought back to this board so that we do have a public discussion so that both we and the public are very aware of what that process is and how the public can participate in it, because it is a little bit of a closed process right now, is my understanding.
Good. Well, after your meetings and mine, why don't we connect? I'm happy to bring something back for discussion. Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next, please.
Good morning. I'm John Ruffcorn. I'm the Public Safety Director for the City of Auburn. Thank you for allowing me to speak here this morning. This morning, I'm here to let you know that the 4 police chiefs within Placer County are adamantly opposed to the county venturing into the marijuana industry in any manner. Different laws and regulations in adjoining jurisdictions will have negative impacts and unintended consequences by creating confusion amongst our citizens. This is not about arrest and incarceration. It is about environmental issues, social issues, and quality of life issues. In Colorado in 2014, they saw a 29% increase in the number of marijuana-related emergency room visits, a 38% increase in hospitalizations. The Children's Hospital reported 2 marijuana-related ingestions in 2009 and 16 in 2014. In Gonzalez v. Raich, the United States Supreme Court ruled that under the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution, the United States Congress may criminalize the production and use of homegrown cannabis, even where states have approved its use for medicinal purposes. Diving back into our high school government class, we all remember that the Constitution of the United States of America is the supreme law of the United States. It is the source of the government powers, and you and I took a pledge to support the Constitution. In the Supremacy Clause states in Article 6 that federal laws have jurisdictional authority over state laws in the event there is a conflict between laws established by 2 governing bodies. And make no mistake about it, federally, marijuana is still illegal. We as local and county government bodies would never change or decrease the standards of the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Federal American Disabilities Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, or workplace discrimination. So why are we choosing to violate this federal law? You and I both took an office to uphold the Constitution. It is my belief that you would be violating that oath if your office, if you make laws or regulation that are in direct violation of federal law. I cannot have a still in my backyard that makes illegal alcohol. I cannot sexually harass my employees, and I cannot make it my non-exempt employees work more than 40 hours a week without compensatory overtime. So why should we allow illegal marijuana to take hold in our beautiful county? Lastly, making a cartoon trying to gain support for the violation of federal law is fundamentally wrong. So I implore you, please do not change what is illegal by bypassing our federal drug laws and allowing marijuana of any type of presence here in Placer County.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to address the board under public comment? Please come forward and state your name.
Samawepte Hekatema Ukate Rose Steele Ilambuk. I said, how are you all today? Good morning. My name is Rose Steele. I'm from Elam. I live in Lake County, California, and we're currently being displaced from our tribe. And I bring this issue here to the Board of Supervisors because Supervisor Duran is the attorney that is helping disenroll our tribe. And so I'm just bringing it as a matter of urgency to this board here today. We have 61 adults that are being displaced, 71 children, 4 veterans, 2 ceremonial houses, and our last speaker of our language. And so I just want to come and share that here today. We have members that live in your county that are able to vote in your election, but they're not able to vote in their own tribal election. And it has nothing to do with anything but disagreeing against our tribal government. And I would just like to share that with you today. Also that that we also disagree with the cell tower being built on Maidu ancestral land also. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to address the board under public comment? I would only point out that, noting that you're all sitting together, Placer County does not have any jurisdiction over the issue that was just referenced, so a public comment is for issues for which we do have public comment, so go ahead.
Okay. I believe our why we came here today was to state that we do have members who live in District 1 who, like we said, voted for Supervisor Jack Duran, who are not able to vote in our own tribal elections. So today I wanted to thank you guys for allowing me to speak. Also, I do understand that this has no involvement with Placer County, but I did want to address Supervisor Duran today. My name is Elvina Brown, and I'm from the Elam Indian Colony. I'm a single mother. I have 4 children. I'm on my way to transferring to a 4-year to get a bachelor's degree. And I wanted to come to you today because the decision you make to be involved with Elam affects me and my children. You know, the next time you and I see each other, I may not be able to say I'm from Elam because the choice you make to be involved with them, to disenroll the families, traditional families. So I just wanted to come here today and address you, wanted you to hear my story, and to let you know that we are the faces of this issue, the faces of disenrollment. And we also don't support the tower on the Maidu land. Thank you.
Anyone else from the public who'd like to make a comment regarding issues for which Placer County Board of Supervisors has jurisdiction and not an issue that's private between individual parties, including one of the board members?
Okay, so can I still speak? It's the
On the
same
cell tower issue.
Okay, well, I was a tribal monitor in my home for cell towers and stuff like that, and the process was violated on behalf of their tribe by not giving information and getting contact with their tribe to discuss having tribal monitors set forth, and the communication, the lack of communication between the county and the tribe. There should have been a little bit more on that behalf. So we do not support the cell tower, the Verizon cell tower, in their behalf either. And I am also from Lake County. I work for the county. I am on the Children's Council. I work with CPS. I am peer parent advocate for the county of Lake. I put my time in children and elders, and I'm here on behalf of Duran too. You know, it's my future, my children, my future generations are not being able to have a future because of this, because of your party. So I just wanted to put that out there and raise awareness, you know?
And I'm sorry if you could keep your comments specific to issues that are appropriate, but also we need your name for the record.
My name is Jessica Brown.
Thank you. Anyone else who'd like to address the board on something appropriate to Placer County? Please come forward and state your name for the record. Okay, with that, we will close public comment, and we'll go to our first timed item, which is 9:10, and it is a commendation for our retiring Director of Community Development Resources, CEDRA, commonly known. So Michael, I know you're hiding in the back there somewhere, but you're gonna have to come forward anyway. I don't know if you're officially retired yet, but if you don't, I could do something, I guess. I'm not sure what. And as usual, you know the protocol. I'm gonna read the resolution, and you'll have fair chance to rebut anything and everything I might say. So.
I may take advantage of it.
I know. So whereas Michael Johnson began employment with Placer County in October 2005 as the planning director and was named Community Development Resource Agency Director in January 2009. Whereas prior to Michael's career at Placer County, he held planning positions in Folsom from 1997 to 2005, also served the cities of Fremont and Merced. He also worked as a land use planner, manager, and environmental planner for private firms and was the planner for San Luis Obispo County Land Conservancy. Whereas Michael's expertise and experience proved to serve him well at Placer County, he worked tirelessly to balance growth and conservation in a dynamic, rapidly growing, and geographically diverse environment. Whereas Michael has helped shepherd many projects and initiatives during his time at Placer County. Among those completed include the adoption of the Granite Bay, Sheridan, and Forest Hill community plans, Bickford Ranch, Placer Vineyards, Regional University, and Riolo Vineyards specific plans, Martis Camp and North Star Village projects. Still underway, but under which a lot of work has been done, a Sunset Industrial Area Plan update, Placer Ranch specific plan, Placer County Conservation Plan, Village at Squaw Valley, Martis Valley West specific plan, and the Tahoe Area Plan update. Whereas these projects not only represent thousands of hours of hard work, thoughtful consideration, and investment by many, they also represent a deep care for our communities and a place for current and future residents to enjoy. Whereas Michael has positioned the county well by having built a tremendously capable, caring team of professionals who will carry on behind him. Whereas Michael was always creative in his approach to problem solving and balancing competing demands, but his creativity didn't stop there. He saw a glimpse into his love of the arts behind the camera. It's through his love of photography and the landscapes he captures that we are reminded of his great contributions. And whereas Michael's professional accomplishments are many, but it is family that is foremost. Among many hats he wears, he has a husband, dad, and a grandfather. So with that, Michael, therefore be resolved, of course, that the board adopts this commendation. And I just personally want to comment that you have probably the most difficult job in all of Placer County anywhere. Both appreciate all your contribution and effort, and particularly being incredibly open with giving Lauren Clark tremendous freedom, and personally from that perspective on the Placer County Conservation Plan, I want to personally thank you for letting him run with that and the great chance you had to let that develop. So with that, I'm going to bring this down for you and give you the microphone.
Thank you.
Photographs first. Thank you so much. Now it's your, yep.
Thank you. Well, it is bittersweet to be here this morning. I'm not often at a loss of words, but today I am at a loss of words. Well, Robert read the words here and acknowledged the things that happened. As I've said before, and as I said to each of you, staff, we're here to implement the direction that you provide. We're here to implement the vision that you all have for your residents of this county. And while there are a lot of projects here, my role, staff's role, is to move those projects forward and to create that balance. And Placer County, more than any other agency, I believe in the state of California, has created that balance between allowing for new land development opportunities, and conserving land that will be around for decades, generations, for people to enjoy. And while my role may be small, it is part of a larger vision for what you all have set for this county. I'm thrilled to have been a part of it, and look forward to continuing in my role as a resident of the county and enjoying what has been created and what will be created in years to come. So thank you all for your time, for your consideration. I have enjoyed working with each of you. And back here, the incredible staff that you have that will lift the mantle, move it forward, and move this county in a direction that's very positive for its residents. So thank you all for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, before you take off, I just want to say best of luck in all your future endeavors, and I hope you get to spend a lot more time behind the camera, because I know that really is a passion for you.
I look forward to that.
Excellent, and perhaps at some point we can have retired Placer County employees art exhibit, and hope to see your stuff featured there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jack?
Michael, thank you. When I came into office in 2011, there was very little going on with regards to development on the west side. Through the economy, interest in Placer County, people started calling me, wanting to talk about their properties, wanting to purchase properties. You know, what do you think about this? Will this fit into your vision for the west side? And through a combination of your guidance as well as staff's guidance, we've got a lot of things moving and shaking on the west side. And I'm very proud to say that the west side is where things are going to be happening. And I want to thank you for making that happen for everybody. I think we've got a great balance in your department as well as Public Works. We're able to reach out to the public, make sure that their issues were addressed as best as we possibly could, keep the development folks in line and their expectations, but most of all, keep things moving. And I want to thank you, and I know that the people of Placer County are going to be thanking you for years to come. So.
Thank you.
Kirk?
You have one of the toughest jobs that we have in Placer County. Now, in deference to our boys in the back in green, your job doesn't include people actually taking a swing at you usually, or pointing guns at you usually, which they have to put up with. But you, in your position, you suffered all kinds of slings and arrows, and most of them coming at you from directions unseen. And so I just wanted to applaud the fact that over the years that you have had to serve this board and multiple members of this board, the complexion of this board having changed, ebbing and flowing. What I've never heard anybody say about you is Michael has his own agenda. You never came to your job with your own agenda. You were always very responsive to the board's agenda, to input from the public, input from your planning commission and your staff, and always very accommodating of both criticisms and compliments in terms of how your department was working and where things might go better. And so I do believe you leave your job perhaps a little better than you found it, and you have equipped people behind you to do their jobs even better. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And Jim?
Well, and finally, I just want to echo all the words that my colleagues have said, and I appreciate your work for the county, and I just really wish you well as you move forward, and I hope your health continues to improve. And as you move forward, enjoy the rest of your retirement. Thank you so much for what you've done for Placer County.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, we'll now go to our 9:15 timed item, which is a resolution establishing a sister county, in Nanping, China. David.
Thank you and good morning, Chairman Wygant, honorable members of the board, Dave Snyder, Office of Economic Development. Thank you for this opportunity to present the item today. I've brought my trusty sidekick, Mr. Mike Holmes, former mayor of Auburn, with me this morning. Trusty and a little bit rusty. We ask you to adopt this resolution supporting an upcoming trip to China with the ultimate goal of establishing the sister county relationship with Nanping County, located in Fujian Province. Mike came to me several months ago with this idea. The purpose of the trip is to lay the groundwork such that a long-term bond between the counties could blossom, through which cultural, educational, business, tourism, and technological exchanges could take place. Just recently, the California and China Trade Office and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development have lent their support to this initiative, including arranging a trading partner roundtable while in Fujian. You all know Mike as a fifth-generation native of the Auburn area who enlisted in the Navy, retired as a captain in 1994. It is the fact that he lived in China for many years that makes this trip and what might come out of it so full of opportunities for success. And before I bring Mike up, I just want to make it crystal clear that there's no cost to the county to express support for the delegation, and should any county employees or officials attend, travel request will be brought before the board at a future meeting. So with that, I'll introduce Mike.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, David. By the way, you got to be very careful using the word bond around this group because it may be on the ballot at some point for some kind of money that you want to get from the county. But anyway, I want to thank the county for having this wonderful picture of Auburn up here, and delighted to see that. Anyway, Placer County has had a long relationship with China, from the gold rush to the building of the Transcontinental Railroad across the Sierras. There are a number of reminders of that relationship throughout the county, from the statue at the railroad worker at the site of the new Gold Rush Museum here in Auburn, to the small monuments in Colfax and at the Gold Run rest stop. A group in the Bay Area is raising $400,000 to erect a larger monument to the railroad workers at Gold Run. By the way, I'd like to thank Supervisor Montgomery, who came out last Saturday to help us clean up the Chinese cemetery out on Highway 49, which, once preserved, could become a major tourist attraction for folks wanting to know more about our history. We selected Nanping, it's Nanping, not Nanping, anyway, so due to its location with the Wuxi Forest Reserve in Fujian Province, which is much like Placer County with a great deal of forested area. Review of sister cities programs revealed that there are sister counties as well. There are over 300 communities that have such pairings between the U.S. and foreign countries. There are currently none in Placer County, although the city of Sacramento has at least 12 sister cities of record. Plus, Sacramento opened a trade office in Chongqing recently, which I visited last year. We recently had a 2-paragraph flyer prepared in both English and Chinese. So there are 2 paragraphs in English and a translation into Chinese with some photographs of some Chinese things around this area. And as Dave mentioned, it has caught the eye of the Governor's Go Biz office in Sacramento and the Bay Area Council, which manages the official California Trade Office in Shanghai. Two officials from the Bay Area Council have expressed an interest in coming to Placer County to assist in our efforts, and I'm certain we would welcome them to help. This small step will offer an opportunity to build cultural and educational exchanges, investment opportunities, tourism, and so forth. So I urge you to approve the motion, this item today as a first step in moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Supervisor Holmes.
Yes, I would like to support this, but on one condition. Would you, I'm talking to you.
Sibling rivalry.
Brothers.
That edifice back on the wall there, would you please write down what it says? So every time I look at it, I'm wondering what that.
It says foo.
What?
It says foo.
Food?
Foo. F-U.
Could you tell me what? Never mind.
I've been saying that for years, and I don't get it on the wall.
You brought the question up. I'm just telling you, it says foo.
Thank you, Mike.
And what does foo mean?
Oh, well,
What does it say? What does it mean?
wealth and happiness is the concept, yes.
Okay, perfect. So the next time someone says that to me,
Like-
I will assume they are wishing me wealth and happiness.
Like in Fujian province.
Okay.
See,
Thank
okay,
you.
yeah. Okay.
I am compelled to say that I think my brother and I communicate better.
Yeah, it just takes you longer.
All right,
Well, thank you, Mike.
okay, thank you.
So we need to adopt this now, or did we? I'm sorry. Does anyone from the public would like to address this item?
Don Whitaker with Ceronics, a businessman here for 35 years. Last manufacturer left in the United States building color monitors. And we have to import everything from China because they've dominated the total television and display market. And Fujian province, beautiful province. I'm there a couple times a year, and it's a great county to be associated with. It's coastal. It's where the tea originated in China, where the monasteries are, beautiful hills and mountains. So it's a nice county to be associated with. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Anyone else?
Hello, Aaron Bromberg. I'm a member of the North Auburn MAC. First of all, I'd like to say I can certainly appreciate the desire for cultural and educational exchange, and I think it's a wonderful idea. However, there has to be some sort of a benefit to your constituents. If there's ever to be a penny spent on travel for any of the county employees or anybody else. So I'd ask that if you do approve this, somehow you attach some sort of a stipulation that we don't pay for vacations for county employees or anybody else to go enjoy the wonderful county there. If you want cultural exchange, have an exchange student. I had 4 from China, so that's a good way to bring people here, and vice versa. So please, no money spent on this for the county. We have other.
And just for your clarification, any appropriations of funds would have to be brought back to the board for that purpose anyhow.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, pleasure of the board. Moved and seconded to adopt the just discussed resolution. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We will now take up our 9:25 timed item, which is a proclamation regarding Wildfire Community Preparedness Day. John.
Good morning, Supervisors. My name is John McEldowney, your Placer County Office of Emergency Services Program Manager. Today, I think I'm going to have a couple people joining me. If Lou Dowling is in the hall or the board chamber, come on up, Lou. As you know, I'm asking you to proclaim May 7th, 2016 as a Wildfire Community Preparedness Day. By way of background, Placer County has a well-documented history of wildfire risk, which has increased in both probability and severity by the drought and associated tree mortality, which is also impacting our wildland-urban interface areas across the entire state of California. And these are also some Fire Safe Alliance representatives as well. Residents in areas with the potential for wildfires can take a proactive measure to reduce the risk and severity of wildfires and reduce deaths, injuries, and property losses through their preparedness efforts. A dedicated day that engages communities and focusing on activities that create awareness, education, and action have the potential to make significant differences before, during, and after a wildfire. Proactive actions from a single individual or an entire community or neighborhood contributes to a safer community when wildfires actually do happen. The residents of Placer County can become local champions through committing a couple of hours or an entire day to improving their property's defensibility and resiliency, and they also can contribute towards Placer County becoming a more fire-adapted community. All residents throughout Placer County are encouraged to participate in Wildfire Community Preparedness Day. There is no fiscal impact to this proclamation, of course, but moving away from the notes, I just wanted to say that Lou is our FireWise Community Preparedness Coordinator, and just some numbers on what she's done in the last few months or a year or so. She's in the process of engaging no less than 24 communities across Placer County to try and get them to become, and it's kind of a long process, but to get them to become registered and certified FireWise communities. She's also in the process of applying for about $3.5 million in grants, primarily for hazardous fuel reduction type activities across the county. So with that, I just wanted to see if Lou had anything to say, or some of our Fire Safe Council representatives. This is Gary Kirk.
Good morning. I'm Gary Kirk. I'm the chairperson for the Forest Hill, Iowa Hill Fire Safe Council. And Lou and I have worked together for years doing this, and we've got 4 communities in Forest Hill right now that are FireWise communities, and we have 2 more on the boards that want to become FireWise communities. So I can't stress enough all the work that Lou's done as far as, help coordinating all this and getting them through their assessment and through their plans and everything else to become FireWise communities. And the monies that she's been able to get through the grants to help us do projects within these communities and around these communities has been awesome. This year we're taking a benefit of quite a few projects up in Forest Hill, where a couple of years ago we didn't have anything. So now some of the funds are coming back to us, and it's going to really help us. So thank you, Lou.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for recognizing May 7th as FireWise Preparedness Day, and thank the communities that we have in this county and the FireWise small communities that we have in this county for all the work that they're doing at the ground level to make this county a lot more FireWise and a lot safer when it comes to fire, and to thank the board for supporting that and for recognizing that.
Thank you.
Before everyone goes, John did me the favor of reading all the language on here, so I'm not going to read it again, which is fantastic, saves me some time. But I did actually want to take the opportunity to recognize Don Belden, a resident of, I think, Blue Canyon still, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. Part of the conversation that we're really trying to expand on with our fire safe councils and this fire safe work is making sure that we really move it up the hill towards areas that maybe haven't thought that much about it in the past. Don and I have known each other 30 years, I think. Yep. And so I was just delighted when you wanted to be on the board and when we were able to appoint you. Can you talk a little bit about what you are doing with the Fire Safe Council work that you're doing?
I was appointed to the Placer Sierra Fire Safe Council a couple of months ago, and we're currently working on the Alta, Dutch Flat, Emigrant Gap area, and bring everybody aware of the FireWise community opportunities and possible grant funding to assist with reducing the effects of the wildfires. I live in just above Blue Canyon, and our area has been surrounded by some big fires in the last 15 years, and it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen sooner or later, but we're going to be prepared and addressing the life safety issues to begin with, and look forward to working with Luana and the county, and appreciate all the efforts you guys do.
Thank you. And I just want to remind people that May 7th is this coming Saturday, so you have the opportunity to get out there on Saturday and do some of that defensible space work. Strongly encourage you, if you have a neighbor who may be disabled or elderly, to help them, because the help that you give your neighbor will help you when and if a fire comes through your community. And please be sure to reach out to John or to Luana or to any member of your local fire safe groups to see how you can become involved both individually and at a neighborhood level, because it's going to take all of us doing some heavy lifting and some limbing and some brush removal and all of that to make sure that we create a more fire-safe Placer County. Having said that, I'm going to come down with the proclamation and we'll get a couple of photos. So everyone, please stay there. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but thank you. Come up here. We can't, okay. Okay, the women in middle. Excellent, thank you. Who gets this?
Lou.
Lou. Okay. You can put it up in your office and take it to all the meetings. Thank
Yes,
you.
I will.
all your
Thank
work.
you, thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks.
I just wanted to say one more thing. The Firewise, there's 4 Firewise communities, small communities in our county that actually applied for small grants. $500. They were awarded those grants through NFPA and and State Farm for Firewise Day this coming Saturday. And so they will be working in their communities and working very hard. So they're actually getting grants at that local level, which is really, really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last real quick PSA, if anybody's listening out there in the internet world or whatever, phone number to call for if you're interested in becoming a Firewise community, 530-886-4600. That's 530-886-4600. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Is there anyone from the public who would actually like to address this item? Seeing none, the pleasure of the board.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the proclamation. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. Okay, we'll now take up our 9:30 timed item, which is a resolution to annex property owned by Tufts Up Group LLC in the Sunset Industrial Area. Thanks, John.
Good morning, board members. My name is still John McEldowney. I'm still the Emergency Services Program Manager. Today, the action before you, I request that you conduct a public hearing, consider all protests, tabulate ballots, adopt a resolution to annex assessor's parcel number 017-210-003-000. That parcel is owned by Turfs Up Group LLC, and it'll be going into Community Facilities District 2012-1, which is the Sunset Industrial Area Services. And also will apply established charge for fire protection services and emergency medical services on each parcel within that said district. As you know, in 2012, your board approved the formation of Community Facilities District number 2012-1, the Sunset Industrial Area Services, to fund ongoing protection and emergency medical services within the Sunset Industrial Area of unincorporated Placer County. CFD 2012-1 is intended to equitably spread costs of both fire protection and emergency medical services to new development within the SIA via a special assessment on the property taxes of annexed parcels. In 2012, the maximum annual assessment was the greater of either an 8 cents per square foot charge for building space or $757 per acre. These unit rates were presented in 2012 dollars and subject to annual inflationary adjustments for properties annexed into the CFD. Current rates are 9 cents per square foot of building space or $816.79 per acre. This annexation is consistent with and supports board policy to spread the cost of funding fire protection and emergency medical services equitably to development within Sunset Industrial Area. As far as fiscal impact, this annexation meets Placer County's general plan goals and policies associated with the equitable apportionment of fire service costs within the SIA and will allow for a graduated reduction in the general fund contribution to fire services within the SIA over time.
Any questions by board members? Jennifer? Okay. With that, John, for good for now. I'll open up the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address this item? See none, I will close public hearing and bring it back to the board for action. Oh, I'm sorry. Yep. Thank you. Could you present the tabulation of ballots, please?
One ballot was received from Bruce Deitert, and the vote was yes.
Thank you. Pleasure of the board. Been moved and seconded to approve the annexation discussed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Welcome.
We will now take up our first department item, which is a status report update on the Placer Ranch specific plan. Michelle.
Good morning, Michelle Kingsbury, now with the County Executive Office. The item before you today is just a brief status update of where we're at with the Placer Ranch Specific Plan project. As you're aware, about a month ago on April 5th, the board directed staff to proceed forward to include Placer Ranch Specific Plan proposal within the Sunset Industrial Area Plan update process. Since that time, staff has been working diligently. We're diving into the technical studies, doing due diligence, meeting with the property owner several times, as well as other county staff as it relates to PCCP and other endeavors. We're also proceeding forward. We've gotten contract scopes of work to update the technical studies as well as the environmental documents, and we're just finalizing our contract documents and due diligence and negotiation with those contract documents. I do anticipate shortly coming back to your board requesting your consideration for approval of the technical studies update contract. It'll be the goal is to update the technical studies within 90 days upon execution of the contract and get moving forward in a really quick and expeditious fashion. We're looking to complete the project proposal and bring back to your board within an 18 to 24 month period to bring forward the specific plan for adoption. And so it's a quick process, and a lot of due diligence and a lot of work to go forward on that, but staff is very committed to that. With that, I'm keeping it brief. Welcome to answer any questions that you may have for us.
Thanks, Michelle. Sure. Are there any questions, board members? I don't see any, but when do you expect I'm assuming you're going to be bringing back the technical report contract requirements, so when do you see that coming forward?
The earliest would be at the next board meeting on May 17th. We're finalizing the contract documents, so we need to get it out for execution and going through the final scope of work to make sure it's buttoned up tightly, as well as all the budgets and everything. At the worst case, it'd be June 3rd, but we're working very hard to hit the May 17th deadline.
Thanks, Michelle. Is there anyone from the public who'd like to address the board on this issue? See none? Thank you for the update. We'll now take up our next department item, which is approval of an award competitive request for proposal Volunteers of America, Northern California Homeless Shelter Services in the North Auburn area, $455,000.
Good morning, Chairman Wygant, members of the board. Tammy Moss Chandler. I'm the Assistant Director for the Department of Health and Human Services. In February, the department worked with the procurement division to release a competitive request for proposals after our February 9th presentation to your board. And this award is consistent with the temporary conditional use permit that your board approved in March around the facility for the homeless shelter on the Placer County Government Center, also known as the DeWitt Center. The initial proposal that came in from Volunteers of America was at a budget that was about 1.2 or 1.1 million. And the department has worked with Volunteers of America to leverage the resources that Right Hand Auburn has brought as a collaborative partner in this effort. They'll continue to provide the food services that total about almost $300,000, $290,000 of that $1.1 million budget that they proposed. And Right Hand Auburn is working also with community partners to provide the food for the shelter, which is really an amazing community effort around continuing to bring on community volunteers through the faith-based community, as well as other community partners. Volunteers of America provides an important leverage around the services that they provide regionally. They're coordinating services for veterans across their services in Sacramento, bringing those services to the shelter here in the Auburn area. They also are leveraging their resources around understanding prevention, rapid rehousing, and affordable housing opportunities, constraints, and barriers. The department's working with Volunteers of America to also leverage grant opportunities to enhance case management. There are 2 grants that we're looking at right now in partnership with them, as well as looking at how to further leverage efficiencies potentially for utilities payments for the building and other cost saving plans. The contract that's in front of you today streamlines the reporting requirements on a monthly basis, really leverages the partnership with Health and Human Services to modify community meetings as needed and to coordinate on-site services with county departments, not just Health and Human Services, but with probation and others. Volunteers of America has been an important partner in our MARBIT planning work groups, as well as with the Continuum of Care as we look at a new strategic plan for Placer County and the continuum of care across Placer County and Nevada County going forward. And so with that, I'll turn to your board for any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions from board members at this time? Jim.
Thank you, Tammy, for bringing this forward. Tell me again how much Right Hand Auburn is going to be contributing?
Well, right now in the proposed budget, Right Hand Auburn would be contributing about $290,000 worth of food through both cash and in-kind resources through community partnerships. And that's a budget based on the maximum occupancy for the building, both on the 24/7 side as well as an overflow side. So it's actually a maximum annualized budget.
So how can we be sure that they can fulfill that obligation? When they first came to us, this was not going to cost the county anything, and now we're going to spend $500,000. And then there's another item on our agenda that's more than $1 million for homelessness services. So how can they, you probably can't answer that question, but I just want to know how they can uphold that obligation.
Our recommended budget today is recommended based on a continued level of support from the county and Right Hand Auburn, which they have successfully contributed over the last 6 months of our contracting relationship financially.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Tammy, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and I appreciate all you've done regarding this issue. I want to make sure, there were a couple things that I think I heard in your presentation, and I wanted to make sure I heard them correctly. Originally, Volunteers of America came in with a higher proposal amount, and we got them down to this $455,000. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. What do we know what the daily per person cost is for this service?
The daily per person cost has run between that $30 to $35 range, and I know Volunteers of America could further answer that if that doesn't fully address your question.
Okay, that's a ballpark figure that works for me. And then on food services, I did get a couple of emails yesterday, and there was some postings on Facebook where people were very concerned about meal dollar amounts that were reflected in what was, I think, termed a budget. Can you clarify, do we pay those meal amounts, or do we reimburse Volunteers of America for those meals?
No, the county has not paid for any meals to date, and we don't intend to, because that's been an important partnership with the community, that the community through Right Hand Auburn is providing for the meals.
So those dollar amounts then are just a reflection of what Right Hand Auburn has been expending?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Jack.
Yes, thank you very much for bringing this item to the Board of Supervisors. Folks, homelessness costs money, right? There's no doubt about that. The city of LA just rolled out $100 million for their homeless services, and their problem is 20 times worse than ours, right? The way that I see it, and according to my calculations, it costs this county, not just the county, but medical services, police, fire, emergency services, $24 million for the 532 homeless folks that were identified in the MARBIT study. The way I see this, we're spending, the total cost is $1.1 million. The average cost of one homeless person, national average, not including the folks that are way off the charts that cost counties $80,000 to $150,000 a piece, Right now, we've reduced that cost for these 100 people down to $10,000 per person, which is a net savings of $3 million off the national average. So we've already addressed 1/4 of our problem. And I do want to say, in addition to the situation up here in Auburn, there is going to be an item brought forward by Health and Human Services, I think it's next board meeting, that is going to consist of I guess it's a right of access to a piece of property down in the Roseville, Rockland area, adjacent to the Santucci Justice Center, for campus with transitional housing, with a service center, with food closet, with medical, dental, and those kinds of things. So this piece right here is the first piece in a series of moves, including the next item that we're going to be taking up with regards to the plan to address not just what's happening with the shelter, but the population that's been here that aren't being served, is a formulation of getting to that bigger strategy, which I'm very appreciative of. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Supervisor Duran. If I may, Chairman Wygant, I just wanted to add that, thank you for bringing up that it's actually Facility Services is bringing agreement in partnership with Health and Human Services that's really in line with the long-term planning around future siting for homeless shelter services and our ongoing work groups around housing, homelessness, and what are the long-term solutions, and that will be before your board if it goes forward as planned later this month.
Thanks, Tammy. And then Jim, your light.
Yeah, I just have to say that, Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles and Los Angeles County, there's 10 million people in Los Angeles County. They have a $27 billion budget, and to equate the issues in Los Angeles with the issues in Placer County, I just cannot abide by. So anyhow, I just need to say that. I think what we've done is create a bigger problem. We had a manageable problem. We've opened this shelter, and now there's more and more transients coming. And the next item, the 10 o'clock item, we're going to be talking about spending another $1.1 million. These costs were not unforeseen by me. I knew that when we started this, that was what was going to happen, and here we are today, getting ready to spend more than $1.5 million on a temporary shelter. I just have to say that. Thank you.
And then, Tammy, I ongoingly ask for feedback on how well the integration communication is working between HHS and our vendor, potentially in this case, and always gotten good feedback, but I want to know if there's anything new or anything I should know or need to know or the public should know.
Thank you, Chairman Wygant. I think the one thing to know is that we are actively continuing to build relationships that are enhancing services every week. And we've had partnership opportunities with the county from our Human Resources Department coming over and doing job training connections, our own Human Services Division and our Business Associates Network working around future job training and access and connections, working with furthering and bettering the access to mental health and substance use treatment services, and really being thoughtful about what's provided at the shelter and what's provided through community partners or the department outside of the shelters.
Okay, thank you. So now I want to open it up to the public for any comments that the public might want to make before the board considers the request.
Hi, Lisa Langren. I'm going to approach this a little bit different this time. I appreciate you growing up in the Bay Area or LA Compton or those comments that were made in the public. I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, probably one of the highest crime rates in the world. And I moved to Auburn for safety. I moved here so that I could be in a small town and not have to deal with things like that. The homelessness is getting worse. So far this week, I've had 3 people come to the door asking for things for the phone, bathroom, and one of them was really intoxicated. What am I going to do? Call the sheriff's department and say, I'm sorry, someone just came to my door. What crime are they committing? And the fact that you go around town and you're now seeing grocery carts full of stuff, it's getting worse. They have not been here. I think we're enabling them at this point. I think a lot of money is being spent. Do I agree? Yeah, we need a shelter, but I think it's gone beyond that at this point. You know, it's very frustrating. Jennifer, you mentioned last board meeting that, yes, there needs to be a shelter here in Auburn, but I really haven't heard that it's not going to be in the same location. I kind of don't understand why we can hurry up and up that camping out in the DeWitt Center for safety for employees, but yet we still keep this little temporary shelter near the schools where they have had episodes, or not episodes, but incidents. I just really wish that you guys would really look more into this as far as the public safety. I just had a guy the other day stand in the middle of the street at Atwood yelling and screaming, then walks over to my yard and yelling and screaming at the bark. I mean, what am I supposed to do? I don't understand this. And I understand you have to help the homeless and they need things, but like I said, we're enabling them and we're bringing more and more in. There are new faces out there, there are new incidents. And the money that we're spending, like I said, it's ridiculous. I think we should invest it in a different location. I think Auburn is too small of a town to take on this kind of homelessness. And if I wanted to be around this, I'd live in a big city. And this is the kind of environment we're creating, a big city environment. I mean, if I was homeless, I would want to live in Auburn because it's a lot safer. But we're really ruining our town. It's a disgrace. I mean, you see their stuff, like, just hidden in corners and leaving it there for storage. And what do? Call the sheriff's department? I'm sorry, I don't like looking at their stuff. Can you have them move it so they can go somewhere else in the same area? There's no resolution to that. Euler had a great point. Maybe we should do like a tent site, spend all that money on a tent city with all the services right there. I'm not saying there's a quick answer, but I want to know that this temporary shelter is going to be moved out of its location. And I'm not talking about the big one. If there's going to be one in Auburn, I want clarification that we're going to have a temporary one at a different site. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to testify?
Good morning, Chairman Wygant, fellow supervisors. Susan Farrington, President of the Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras. Thank you for giving me the time to speak with you. I am speaking for the Homeless Resource Council in favor of this continuation of funding of the temporary shelter until what time that we can develop a permanent solution to the needs of our homeless population here. I do believe that the Volunteers of America have an excellent reputation of operating a high-quality shelter with very positive outcomes, and I trust they've been really good community players at the table with our Homeless Resource Council, and I believe that we're going to continue together to collaborate to find the best solutions to the problems that we face. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to address the board? Nice T-shirt.
Hi, Veronica Blake, CEO at Placer Community Foundation. I just want to echo what Susan Farrington said about the work that's being done by Volunteers of America and Right Hand Auburn. And just to remind the board, at our last meeting where we discussed outcomes related to the work of the Volunteers of America, 35 people were helped to find homes. And I think they are part of the solution. And while I'm very sympathetic towards those folks that are living in that neighborhood and the fact that we're all having to deal with homelessness, I do think that the work is being done as part of the solution. So I encourage your vote in favor. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Father Mike from St. Teresa's, and just a lady there that spoke, one of my neighbors. I'm so sorry that there is, that she came here to live, and I'm sorry that it's this way. But I've lived here for 10 years, and the amount of people that have been outside the church are coming there, and I'll talk to them, and they'll tell me they're Catholic, and I go back along the line. So it isn't just because they're Catholic, and whatever they are, we have to talk to them. But I hate to see what they're doing to our neighbors. That's, so we need to be able to bring peace to our neighborhood as well. So also, the reason I came up is because I heard about our schools and so forth, and somebody was here from our parish, and saying how our kids have to be escorted to the bathrooms. It's not so. Never. We have we've a gated community inside. All Catholic schools are all, you have to go through the offices. And yes, if we're out and about down the town or somewhere else, everybody has to have somebody go to the bathroom with them. But there was lies told here, and it is safe. I have asked the homeless to leave around the church. I've put them on buses. I can honest to God say, I'm retiring. I'm half broke, more than half broke, from putting people on buses and out of this town and on planes. And I don't mind doing it if they want to get home and so forth. But I do feel that, you know, we've got to have a sense of humor. We've got to have a sense of charity to my neighbors as well that are hurting. And Scott Holbrook got up there about 18 months ago and wrote in the paper that churches are doing nothing. I'd like to thank him for his suggestion, because that Christmas I brought them into the parish hall. There was nobody around, kids were gone, and they were excellent. And, you know, they're human beings, there are families, and in the right hand of Auburn, two of our officers, one of their daughters died out there, and one of their daughters is in a special apartment and so forth from now on, and she's raising the kids. So you can see it's not an easy problem, and I thank you for dealing with it. I thank you for having a heart of gold. I should not probably have said gold because you don't have gold, but maybe it's in this county, but we should maybe put a tax on the gold miners or something to get some of it. But I don't know how to solve everything. So I'm asking you guys to continue the good work that you've begun, and it's not easy, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Father.
I'm breaking the golden rule, never follow a priest when speaking. My name is David Loy. I'm the Executive Director of the Lazarus Project. I rarely speak, but I feel at this time there's necessary to speak. From San Diego to Boston, from Dade County, Florida to King County, Washington, homelessness has become a large social issue, one of the largest for the first time in 30 years. It affects the cities along the coast to the small Midwest towns. Many reasons cause this: mental illness, substance addictions, lack of affordable housing, lack of a living wage. It's a complicated issue. As with other communities throughout this country, Placer County and the collaborative group is working diligently and quickly to come up with a long-term solution to address the issue of homelessness. And though it will not eliminate every single homeless person by providing them with shelter and housing and services, it will have a major impact both fiscally on this county by saving dollars, as well as morally by us taking the high ground and saying those in our community who are the least, the lost, and the last have a purpose in this life. And we can help guide them with a purpose through our long-term solutions. In the meantime, though, we often need to think a little out of the box, a little differently in the way we do business. And through the shelter in Auburn, the Gathering Inn in South Placer County, they are providing critical temporary services looking towards long-term solutions. And if we are to address this issue, and I've been addressing this issue since April 2001, then we need to continue to hold on to the territories that we have victoriously accomplished by establishing shelters, establishing the Lazarus Project, and hold on to these organizations and help fund them in any way we can until we are ready to present a comprehensive plan that the entire community can agree upon. I thank you for your time, I thank you for your consideration, and I urge you to keep funding these solutions until the long-term solution all of us are working on comes to pass. Thank you for your time.
Any other speakers, please?
Good morning. I'm Joe Offer, and I live in Applegate. But I think I spend most of my daytime hours in North Auburn. I belong to St. Teresa Parish, and I do volunteer work there. And I do all my shopping in North Auburn. I think a lot of people who live outside of North Auburn spend most of their time in North Auburn. And I think maybe the reason that there are more homeless people in North Auburn is because it is a center of activity in this county. North Auburn is a center, Roseville is a center. Well, along with business activity, along with the life of the community, we also have to put up with the problem of homeless people. I think the reason that we have more homeless people, that they're more visible in North Auburn now, is because we are a center of activity in the county. I've worked with the homeless shelter since it's opened. My wife and I served dinner there on Easter Sunday, and I was amazed at how well the shelter ran. I was amazed at how polite the people were that were living in the shelter, and I was amazed to see how many of them had improved since they had been able to spend time in the shelter. I see the shelter as a solution to the problem, a problem that exists because North Auburn is a busy center of activity in the county. So I think it would be wrong to blame a solution to the problem, the shelter, for something that happens because North Auburn is becoming more and more urban. So I think we need to look a little deeper and see why the homeless problem exists and what we can do to resolve that problem, and then think that maybe this homeless shelter is a good first step. The proposal from the probation department and the sheriff and HHS is also an excellent suggestion. So I think let's not stop this homeless shelter. This is a solution, not part of the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to address the board? Seeing none, I'll bring the issue back to the board, which is to approve or not the competitive request for proposal to Volunteers of America for $455,000.
Move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the proposal. All those in favor?
Chairman, under discussion on the item before
Kirk,
we
sorry,
actually
yes.
vote. My ongoing concern here simply has to do with I still don't have a definition of success for this endeavor. When this idea was first brought to me back in October of 14, the definition of success then was winter's coming, we have people outside who need temporary housing, a place to sleep, a place to get warm, and can we use this facility temporarily to accommodate folks indoors? And now it has changed to something else, that this is our temporary solution to homelessness in the North Auburn area. But we still have no definition of success. What, if we are successful in addressing the homeless situation in North Auburn, what does that mean? Just a whole bunch of people in a place? Or does it mean a whole bunch of people who no longer need a place? And if it is, as I would hope it is, a whole bunch of people that no longer need the government assistance, as opposed to look at how many people we, the government, are accommodating, if it is the prior objective, what metrics do we have in place right now that are measurable, that allow us to look and say we are on a path towards success? Because unless we are able to define that we are on a path towards success, the tool, the homeless shelter, we don't know whether or not it is an effective tool to address this problem of homelessness. And so far, I have not seen anything that says, here's who we're serving, name, rank, and serial number. These are the names of the people that we are serving. This is how many times we have provided service to them, and these are the services that we are providing. And based on our analysis, our assessment of these individuals, because we keep referring to the homeless, it is a population of individuals. until we identify on an individual by individual basis what is the appropriate outcome for this individual based on where they are right now in their path in life. What is the appropriate outcome for that individual, and do we have them on the right track? There is no solution to homelessness. There are different locations at which we will house people who have no path out of this condition. And so, once again, I'm going to ask, can we get our arms around the various components of measurements of success based on individuals and where they are? We've already had conversations at the board about this. We have folks, I first brought it up, I don't know, over a year ago. We have folks who find themselves in this position but don't want to be there. And we have folks who find themselves in this position and are okay with that lifestyle. That's I think the easiest, broadest measurement. But then we need to drill down on those who find themselves in this condition and don't want to be in this condition. Are there the various channels through which we can put people who may be able to live on their own with appropriate supervision and medication, would be able to live on their own just fine the day after tomorrow if their economic condition improved, might never be able to live on their own unsupervised? And what are the outcomes for the people that fit into these channels? We're treating the symptom. We're not actually addressing the individual at this point. And until we have a structure in place that says, beginning at the front door of our shelter with Right Hand Auburn, until we have something that says, today we met Bill Smith for the first time. He showed up at our door for the first time. And now we know who Bill Smith is. And now we're going to put Bill Smith into one of these tracks that ultimately ends in a solution for Bill Smith. And we just continue to treat the symptom of give him a place to stay, give him a meal, give him a shower. I cannot continue supporting the impact that we are creating in the North Auburn community by not ultimately driving at what is that solution. And we've been having this conversation now for going on a year and a half. And I'm still not satisfied that within a year and a half, we haven't broken this down to its base elements to where we actually have tangible data that shows us of the people that we've touched by spending this much money, here's how many we have on this path to success. I've asked for the data. If it exists and I just haven't gotten it, then great. But if not, I certainly hope we are not far away from having something that actually shows us that our efforts are worthwhile and the imposition that we've created on this North Auburn neighborhood is worth their while as well.
Jack, then Jennifer.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Volunteers of America. Leo looks like he was about ready to jump out of his seat. I'm sure he's got some of that information. And if you could speak to it, that would be great. The reason that I spoke about the money piece, I think that's part of it. That's part of the outcome in my vision of what, we're never going to cure it. We can manage it better. And I think that's what we're embarking on. But, the money and the cost to the community, is one of those factors for me, is reducing that $24 million as low as we can get it. So, Leo.
I wanted to turn to Leo to answer that question, but I also wanted to add that those metrics are detailed in the request for proposal that the county released, and it's the reason why the department recommended a request for proposal, so it's entirely transparent of the metrics that are being tracked around what individual case management means, and Leo can talk to that. That is the proposal that was responded to, and I apologize, Supervisor Euler, your request didn't get to my desk, but I will make sure it gets to the right desk. We certainly do have that data of who's being case managed and who is getting those services, and those metrics are managed both through what goes into their initial intake all the way through case management. I'll turn it to Leo to talk through.
I appreciate Supervisor Euler's comments about what do we know? What's the solution? There is a solution. It's a hard-fought solution to get to. It's the end zone that we strive to get into, which is to move someone from homelessness into housing, into whether it's supportive housing, independent living housing, housing that has case management coming in to continue to make sure that somebody stays stabilized, but also housing that is sympathetic toward when you place somebody in an apartment or a home, that they're a good fit for that neighborhood and that community as well. I think it would be silly to put somebody who might still be in the middle of their addiction into an apartment complex where their family and children, and where that addiction continues. So what we have to do at the shelter is we have to stabilize folks. We have to begin drug and alcohol treatment programs. We have to make the connections to those services so that when somebody does graduate out of the shelter, and they're doing it all the time, and we've got the data, all that data is collected, all that data is submitted, that they are then best prepared to survive on their own or in a shared housing environment and not fall back into the homeless continuum. We do the HMIS system so that we can track somebody who do they come back into the system after we've moved them out of the system? That's standard practice across the country. Your matrix of measurement is if John Smith entered through some gateway shelter program, went through transitional housing, went through drug treatment and got housing, do they come back into the system within 6 months or a year or 2 years? That's what the HMIS system is all about. That's why HUD mandates it. HUD's definition of success is taking somebody who has zero income and is unhoused into some kind of housing and some kind of income. And so that income is going to be job employment, which we are very focused on, or it's hooking people up who have severe disabilities with the resources that they're due, SSDI. And it's cobbling together those resources that now stabilize that individual, but also deal with the drug and alcohol issues that present themselves. This shelter is a two-pronged shelter. There's 47 beds right now for men and women, and that's a 24/7 side, and they are there and they are working that program. They are getting case management. In fact, even on the overflow side, the additional 53 people that can be in overflow, they're getting case managed in the same respect that when they come in, John Smith comes in, they sit down, we do a vulnerability index assessment on them so we know what their issues are. And if they're prepared, they can't get into the 24/7 side until they show that they have a strong interest in leaving homelessness and working on their issues. That's what we've invested in here, and that's what is very successful at this point. I know currently 15 people have been employed. I know we have 35 people that have moved into housing. These people have stabilized at the shelter and moved on appropriately. We'll be tracking HMIS to see if they come back into the system. If they come back into the system in Roseville or in Sacramento, well, not Sacramento, but anywhere in Placer County, the HMIS system is going to say this is a repeat person, and that data is available. So the data is there. Everything you asked for is being done and done successfully. And short of, we don't turn Leo McFarland's name into the general public to say they're at the shelter, but that's available for county audit at any time. All the files are there. Every single person has a case file. Every single person has a plan of action, and it ratchets up to a whole new level when they get to the 24/7 side. So you've got a very clean, appropriate shelter operating right now that's having great success. We have 18 people in treatment programs that we put into treatment programs from the shelter right now. So all that data is there. It's turned in on a monthly basis as well in sort of a consolidated form. But Mr. Euler, I'm very proud of what's being done there, very much so. It is a great investment by Placer County and Right-Hand Auburn to this effect. The challenge that we have is there's still a roadblock to affordable housing. I've said this before. Everybody has said this before. Affordable housing. I've got people queued up right now, 15 people, as according to the data, 15 people waiting to get into housing somewhere right now, are ready. They've passed all the tests that you would want to see somebody pass. They're sober, they clean, they have income, they have a job. I can't get them housed. So that's a huge barrier, the biggest barrier for Placer County homelessness. Where do we go from here? So if part of your comments are, we need to invest locally as a community to some kind of housing, some kind of creative housing that gets people off the streets. They're queued up, ready to go. We're bottlenecked right now. So I would hope the community continues to invest in the broader issue of affordable housing. And it doesn't have to be in North Auburn, but it just needs to be available.
I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, if I may reply just real quick.
Sure.
2 quick points. Number 1, glad to hear the data is available. Certainly, this is not the first time you've heard me ask the questions about the data, about the objective measurables and all the rest. You, our staff, others have known that I have been skeptical of continuing down this path. And yet, in advance of awarding this contract today, the only request that I had for a meeting was from Bridget Barnes. We met yesterday to talk about this. I asked her the question about data. She said, I think there's data out there, but I didn't get a request from staff to address my concerns about objective measurables and how are we defining success and are we meeting those benchmarks. I didn't get a request from the folks who are gathering the data to explain to me what the data is, even though sitting here in public forums previously, I've asked for this information before. So I showed up here today asking the same question that I've asked historically and have not had any of the data presented to me. That's number 1. Number 2, what you're describing, if it exists, fantastic. But it kind of illustrates my original point. We were asked as a board to accommodate a specific need on a temporary basis at a location. The reason I voted against it the very first time, as I told Bridget yesterday and as I said back then, was there's no such thing as temporary when it comes to government. And we do it under the guise of we're going to do it temporarily. What you're describing is a very robust offering of services that needs to be housed, needs to be accommodated. But we've seen it morph over time, and I think we have an obligation as a board to reevaluate whether or not we think this is ongoing the right location for this intense level of use. And had it originally been proposed, and I'd ask each of my colleagues to consider, had this intense level of use originally been proposed when we were asked in December 14 to open this shelter to give people a dry place to stay, would we have approved this location for this intense level of use? Those are my only 2 points. Thank you.
Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you, Leo, for clarifying. That information, just to reiterate, is available. I've seen it. It is stripped of personal information because that's not something that really any of us need to know. I think, with all due respect to Supervisor Euler, I think part of our role as county supervisors is if someone isn't reaching out to us, we need to reach out to them and say, hey, where is this information? That's part of our job. It's a two-way street. We can't just sit and expect to be informed. Now, we get a ton of input, for which I'm extremely thankful, but it's my job, if I'm not hearing from someone, to reach out to them and say, what's going on with this? You know, I'm hearing some rumors. Can you help me with this? I think David Loya said, you know, that we're providing critical temporary services looking toward a long-term solution. I think that's really what we're doing today. We're being asked to provide critical temporary services at the DeWitt facility while we look to that longer-term solution, which very well may be, I speak English, down closer to the Santucci Center as an initial facility. I don't think anyone on this board believes that the DeWitt Center is the right place for this facility long-term. I keep saying that, and I'm going to keep saying it. It's not the right place. We get it. But there are costs associated with homelessness, whether we ignore them and don't provide any services, or whether we say, yeah, we're going to step up and provide services that create opportunities to those folks who want to, because you're quite right, not everyone wants to, to get out of homelessness and to become productive members of society again. The item that we're going to be hearing from the Sheriff's Office, from probation, and from Health and Human Services helps us get to that solution, because we all agree that there needs to be a solution, and it's paid for one way or another. It's paid for whether we sit on our hands and do nothing in costs to all of us as taxpayers, or it's paid for whether we take some proactive actions to help reduce homelessness in our community. So I'm going to suggest that we do move forward with this action today. There's already been a first and a second on this, but I think it's just incumbent upon all of us as a board to recognize that we have costs if we do nothing, and we have costs if we do something, and doing something is frankly the better choice.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to make a couple comments, and if we could have a roll call vote. So just to relieve any potential anxiety, I'm going to vote for the motion, so you know that. But in terms of, I think, as we move down the road and continue on this path, not acknowledging that we're not at an end point right now by any stretch of the imagination. I'm receptive and sensitive to Kirk's concerns about the data. I want that to help us formalize the best strategy, comprehensive strategy we possibly can. My predisposition at this point, after having gone this far down the road, is that we've got an issue that needs to be addressed in South Placer as compared to the Auburn area. I also concur that anything we can do to alter the current DeWitt site might provide relief as it relates to impacts on neighborhoods, and I want to exhaustively have that reviewed. That dovetails into our next item, also has to do with policing and managing what might be abuses of the law as a result of this issue. And I guess finally, from what I have learned and what I understand at this point in time, and I think what has been revealed in the information, the data that we've collected, is that we're always going to have some level of a homeless problem. I think we all want to maximize the kinds of concerns that Kirk articulated, which is to try to minimize that to the fullest extent possible, not to enable it. But I believe it's always going to be here. We could do nothing, and I suspect that if we did that immediately, that the North Auburn neighborhoods would be worse off than they are currently with the shelter that we have, even if the site is not perfect. So I want to find, for me, that long-term best case circumstance where we're creating the best possible solution in an affordable way at the best possible price. So with that, could we have our vote, please?
Duran? Yes. Holmes? No. Euler? No. Montgomery?
Yes.
Wygant?
Yes. So if we could go now to our 10 o'clock timed item. It's a collaborative plan by the sheriff, probation, Health and Human Services with regards to addressing the homelessness issue in specifically the North Auburn area.
Good morning, Chairman Wygant, members of the board, Mr. Bosch. Mark Jacquini of the Placer County Sheriff's Office. I'm joined today by Lieutenant Jeff Swearingen from our Field Operations Division, David McManus, the Assistant Chief Probation Officer, and Tammy Moss-Chandler, the Assistant Director of HHS. We're here this morning to present to your board a joint presentation of a collaborative plan from the Sheriff's Office, the Probation Department, and the Department of Health and Human Services on a plan to help address homelessness in Placer County. Prior to me turning it over to the Lieutenant and to the departments to discuss this plan, I want to emphasize to your board, in part due to your comments this morning, not one of our agencies believes that this is the plan. This is simply a plan. This plan that you're going to hear has an associated cost that comes with it. But by no means is this any one of us saying this is the only plan that we can implement. So I just want to emphasize that. There is a cost that comes with the plan you're getting ready to hear about. But beyond that, it's up to your board at to what level you want to implement this plan. I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Swearingen.
Good morning, Chairman Wygant. And honorable members of the board. On behalf of Sheriff Bonner, I'd like to thank you for your time and the opportunity to share information with you at the request of the board regarding homelessness in Placer County. The Sheriff's Office is committed to providing exceptional public safety services And part of the component providing the services our community deserves is assessing factors affecting public safety. That includes community impacts of the homeless population. For quite some time, we've been keeping track of calls for service related to the homeless community in Placer County. We found that many of the calls for service related to the homeless community were primarily focused in the North Auburn area. Reduction of the criminal element and recidivism within the homeless population in Placer County remains a priority. To effectively address these issues, we suggest creating 4 full-time homeless community liaison deputies to respond, make contact, document, track, and refer members of the homeless community to services. Primary duties of these homeless community liaison deputies will include addressing ongoing concerns related to the transient behavior and criminal activity. Assigned deputies will conduct direct enforcement with individuals who engage in quality of life ordinance offenses and criminal activities that negatively affect the community. The deputies will utilize discretion and balance their job by enforcing the law while also providing human assistance to help those in the homeless population with their needs. Additionally, the deputies will organize and supervise cleanups of abandoned property and illegal campsites. This collaborative effort will task the deputies with maintaining clear lines of communication and information sharing with the Probation Department, Health and Human Services, faith-based nonprofit organizations, and other law enforcement agencies. The homeless community liaison deputies would be able to refer homeless individuals for assistance in obtaining employment, general aid, family support, and housing. The deputies will be tasked with maintaining a database to track each of their contacts and their progress through the system. In the future, we hope to integrate data resources of the Homeless Management Information System with data collected by the deputies. We hope this will provide a more comprehensive picture of the homeless community in Placer County. Recent data from the Corrections Division highlights issues with repeat offenders from the homeless community cycling to the jail and impacting operations. For example, 71 members of the homeless community were booked 10 or more times, accounting for a total of 517 rearrests and bookings. The Placer County Sheriff's Office is pleased to partner with the community, Health and Human Services, and Probation to try and reduce the number of homeless in the county by providing referral for services. We are committed to improving the quality of life for Placer County residents adversely affected by local crime and improving the quality of life for those individuals who find themselves part of the homeless community. The board's implementation of the plan will allow the Placer County Sheriff's Office to have a dedicated homeless community liaison deputy on duty 7 days a week for both day and swing shifts from 6:30 a.m. to 1 a.m. the following day. Thank you.
Good morning, Honorable Board, Chairman Wygant, and Mr. Bosch. I'm David McManus, your Assistant Chief Probation Officer. The Probation Department is working with our collaborative partners to proactively help address and mitigate homelessness in Placer County. On March 7th, we redirected a senior deputy probation officer to manage a caseload of exclusively transient offenders to increase accountability, enhance community safety, and to better focus on the complex service needs of this population. This officer maintains a high-profile presence in the community along with sheriff's deputies and has already held transient offenders accountable to their terms and conditions of community release. She has done so through drug and alcohol testing, utilization of electronic monitoring, and by requesting warrants for those that fail to report to us. She has also made referrals to services and programming for individuals. Additionally, the Probation Department has begun a life skills and drug and alcohol course at the Welcome Center Monday through Thursday, utilizing our reentry center partners, the Sacramento County Office of Education. And we are planning for full implementation of a reentry program in Auburn that will model the South Placer PrEP program. This will include evidence-based cognitive behavioral interventions, substance abuse education, life skills programming, job readiness, and education services. Furthermore, the Probation Department, in conjunction with HHS, is working to create 2 client services practitioner positions, one of which would co-locate at probation to work directly with the senior deputy to complete risk and needs assessments, develop collaborative case plans, and provide comprehensive case management. Staff would make referrals for mental health and drug and alcohol treatment, refer offenders to the HHS screening clinic, and assist with Medi-Cal enrollment. This coordinated effort between HHS and probation would best facilitate the delivery of programming and services. The second client services practitioner would co-locate with probation and sheriff's office staff to work with transients in custody to ensure that a reentry plan is in place at the time of release, utilizing the aforementioned reentry services and supports. To effectively implement this plan, probation prefers the option of creating one new senior deputy probation officer allocation to work with the senior deputy probation officer that was redirected in March, and has identified the need for 2 additional HHS client services practitioners to provide a systematic approach to case management, provide evidence-based service delivery, and increase offender accountability. This plan provides the opportunity for a collaborative approach with our partners at HHS and the Sheriff's Department, with the goal of enhanced community safety and increased self-sufficiency of the transient population. Thank you for this opportunity, and I'll pass it off to Tammy Moss-Chandler at HHS.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. It's been a privilege to work on this collaborative effort with the stellar employees in the Sheriff's Department as well as in the Probation Department to really address the system-wide issues and these opportunities to enhance evidence-based practices here in Placer County. Health and Human Services, as part of this partnership, is proposing to add a housing coordinator that would work really on these housing issues that your board has continued to hear about that impacts individuals who are reentering from the criminal justice system and impacts the broader community in Placer County around the concerns about our less than 2% vacancy rate in our housing market in general, and an even tighter vacancy rate for low-income affordable housing opportunities. As part of this ongoing effort, we want to continue to let your board know that part of this collaborative effort is in conjunction with the comprehensive planning that the Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras is helping to implement with Health and Human Services through the Marbit study work groups that have been occurring. And Susan Farrington, who's behind me as president of the Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras board, and with her board members and community partners, is planning to return to your board in the fall with the additional input and implementation plans around long-term planning for homelessness. And in the meantime, we really want to bring forward these requests that are in line with even recent statewide forums that CSAC has had around homelessness and what some of the key evidence-based intersections and interventions to provide could be.
Thank you. That's the presentation?
That's it.
Any questions or comments from board members? First Jack, then Kirk, then Jennifer.
Yes, thank you for bringing this forward, Tammy. You know, one of the concerns that I have is that so much of what we've heard about the homeless is that there are a lot of mental health issues. And what is our bandwidth for HHS with regards to having folks, psychologists, psychiatrists? Do we need more? Do we need, I mean, do we have enough bandwidth to address this particular issue, or are we going to be needing to put on more folks to address it?
I think it's a really important time of analyzing that, but this recommendation before your board today is part of that solution around the practitioners that have been so successful with the PrEP reentry program of having this partnership with probation, an adult system of care practitioner that's working intimately in this way of addressing the population, and now adding the Sheriff's Department in that partnership, is trying to streamline the assessment process for this population and getting them into services and then further assessing the needs of what the department can do to address substance use and mental illness.
So we'll know down the road, I guess, after we get into it, what we're going to need additional resources mental health wise.
I would say that that's an accurate statement.
Okay, thank you very much. Just another overall comment. I think this is something that I know some of the other supervisors talked about, a strategy to address the overall problem in North Auburn as well as other areas in Placer County. I think it's real important that we have the shelter and now we have this strategy to kind of streamline the process of moving people into their different programs to kind of help the situation. And just doing a little math, for the prior action that we just took, the 1 point, or at least the 600,000 for the shelter, that turns out to $1.07 per person in the county, and this action at 1.1 is $3.15. per person in the county. My question to anybody out there is would you spend $5 a year to address this issue? Thank you.
Kirk?
So, perhaps given the kind of the blurring of the lines between the last agenda item and this one, and the prep on this one that I was doing in conjunction with all the rest, reinforced in my mind the concern that I raised previously about the data and all the rest. As I'm going through this, my concern with this proposal is we're now proposing what looks like a separate data management system that the sheriff's office would use that is separate and apart from what we're looking at under the HMIS system. So we're going to develop kind of a contact management system for the sheriff's office. The description that we have for the homeless community liaison is to reach out to homeless individuals during these contacts, determine referrals for additional services and case management and all the rest. And maybe, again, getting back to my previous requests here at the chamber for objective measurable data, beginning with the individual and tracking an individual through, I don't know why we would even start this process without an integrated system. I don't know why we would start down a path of a separate management system that at some point we would hope, as it says, we're hopeful to integrate the data resources. I don't know why we would start that without having the integration up front, because breaking this down, if more than one person is responsible for the success of an individual we've identified in our homeless system, then nobody's responsible for the success of that person. If now we're going to say, well, we have the homeless liaison in the sheriff's office that is working with them over here, and we have somebody else in HHS that's working with them over here, like we do with planning, we need one person in charge of a project, and each of these individuals needs to be viewed as a project, and ultimately one person needs to be, now if we decide that that person should live in the sheriff's office as opposed to HHS, that's fine. I think it's better in HHS, but we need the data integrated from the onset. When you folks make contact with somebody, you are either making contact with somebody that's in a database that we already have, or it's a new contact. And if it's a new contact, there needs to be a channel. What am I doing with this person? What are my instructions on a new contact for somebody we don't already have a history of? We don't know anything about this person. How do we integrate that person into this process over here? And as far as probation's role in it, probation, in my mind, has a significantly lesser role, because that's, to get to probation, it's somebody who's had to meet a whole different set of criteria. They've already gone through the system. We've missed something along the lines if they're already in probation and if probation's aware of them. But there again, now you're integrating somebody who's responsible for making sure that they adhere to the law with somebody who's responsible for making sure that they are mentally capable of adhering to the law. And so, you know, it was perhaps in review of this item that my frustration continued to grow over what I default back to, and that is we've got to have a good objective data set that we begin with every individual with whom we make contact. And that has to, you guys have to be able to refer back to that and say, this person is known to us, and here are the issues, and here's who I need to contact within HHS for appropriate next steps and how to treat that individual. By the time it gets to these guys, we should have an extensive history of who the person is. And so while I applaud, this is exactly the kind of coordination of effort we need. I think taking this step until we are ready to integrate that data in one location is premature.
So we do currently track that data through our crime analysis unit. Obviously, creating 4 more additional positions that would focus on the homeless issue would creating probably a tremendous workload on the two folks that we have working up there. So at the time that we created this proposal, we did not have access to HMIS, but we do want to centralize that data so that we can all reach it and get a comprehensive picture.
And if I could, just to map onto the same topic, is there currently much, no opportunity for integration to make sure that we don't have overlap, wasted cost, and the fullest bang for our buck? Because certainly if we had one data set, as Kirk referred to, and it targeted the multiple needs of at least all three of these agencies, it seems to me to be hugely opportunistic. And I want some feedback on, is there that potential, are there silos that exist that we can't break down, or whatever you might want to communicate?
So again, Jeff.
Jeff Brown, your Health and Human Services Department Director. Right now, HMIS does not contain extensive criminal justice system data. I think we're going to have to explore how far we can integrate those systems. I mean, we're certainly going to have to coordinate data from those systems. I think the whole premise of adding practitioners and having them co-located with probation staff and accessible to the sheriff is to make sure that data is shared and that we're coordinating and making sure that there is one primary person that's working with that individual. And I certainly hear your concerns, Supervisor Euler, about data. I think greatly appreciated. We're only really going to be able to measure our success to the extent that we have data to tell the story. But that's something we're going to have to investigate as we roll this out. We certainly will have every individual entered into our homeless management information system, but to the extent that we can add data elements for criminal justice system data, we will have to explore that.
Well, so just to comment on my part, it seems to me like this question is classic to the model of Placer County's Health and Human Services, which started out life with special enabling temporary legislation, which allowed us to be, to me, it's like a charter school in the school system where we could actually break down those silos, and now, of course, all of that's permanent, and it's an ongoing work in progress, and I understand that. But I guess my vision would be that together we look at what is the optimum data set, not first look at what constraints exist with the silos that may exist out there. And then if the answer more is the optimum data sets results in a need for maybe some lobbying or some more special enabling legislation, I want the board to know that as early as possible so we can actually take action so that we can potentially craft something that actually is state-of-the-art and the best possible.
No, absolutely. We'll certainly get county council involved as to what we can do within our current system. And if what we need to do is not what we can do, I agree we need to seek, other solutions.
Great, thanks. Kirk, I didn't mean to interrupt. Are you finished?
Is it showing my light still on over there?
Nope.
Okay. But I will. That was exactly the example I was thinking of, was the Placer model on the HHS, and I think the challenge is if in integration you discover what the barriers are for effective integration of the data, and again I'm really focused on driving this back to an individual managing an individual. One person responsible for each person we identify that comes into that system, and whatever the barriers are that stop us from effectively creating the tools necessary to move somebody through to whatever we define as success. It's your job to let us know we cannot get past this, and that's when, as Robert indicated, we need to go and work with our congressional delegation or legislative delegation at the state, wherever it's appropriate, to get the rule changed so that we can. Because if you're dealing with it, if you're frustrated by it, the other 57 counties are dealing with it and frustrated by it, so let's get it changed.
Jennifer, then Jim.
Thank you. And Jeff, don't go anywhere, because, sorry. He always tries that.
Seemed like a good opening.
So I actually want to echo the concerns of Supervisor Euler and Supervisor Wygant as it relates to making sure that we can share that information as robustly as possible. It sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that what you said is that the HMIS system has some limitations, but there is potential for sharing of information, PCSO, probation, health and human services, and VOA. There is some potential for sharing information now within that format. Is that, did
That's
I
correct.
understand that?
That's correct.
Okay, so my request is let's start that as robustly as possible, and then when we do identify those things where, oh, we've just bumped up against a wall that we can't get past, bring it back to us as quickly as possible so we can help you figure it out, because I agree completely. Unless we can track individuals on an individual basis throughout all their needs and services, what we're doing is just sort of, little stardust all over the place instead of a focused program. So I just wanted to make sure that I understood what you said, so now you can go sit down, and thank you. I appreciate you standing up. I also wanted to just take a little bit of a step back and talk about, so why are we here today even having this conversation? Well, we're here today because we heard from our community that they were concerned specifically about safety issues and issues of criminality, whether it's through the sheriff's office or problems with probation, or mental health and substance abuse issues. We heard that there was a real concern about this, and people wanted us to actually step up and do something to address it. So this is part of what we're doing to address this larger solution. We've already created some quality of life ordinances. Jack is working on some things down in South Placer. I'm working on some things in Eastern Placer with the number of partners up there on homelessness and criminality. And I don't really want to say criminality, because I think that's probably not the most appropriate word for the population we're talking about. Certainly some segments of it, but not all of it. I really am hopeful that in terms of tracking, I noticed in the staff report it says the Sheriff's Office has been keeping transient-related statistics in the field since June 2014, so slightly less than 2 years. Unfortunately, prior to August 2015, data input was a bit inconsistent and therefore proved somewhat unreliable. I know that we're now doing a much more robust process of tracking that, but it sort of goes to this thought that we can quantify what we have now, but we can't really compare it to the past because we don't know what the past was, unfortunately. Some of the issues that have come up in this larger discussion is how AB 109 and Prop 47 plays into this, and if there's actions that we can take that can help address some of that through what we're discussing today. So I guess a question I have for the Sheriff's Office specifically is there anything in the future, not even necessarily this that we're talking about today, but anything legislatively that the state is working on that can help us maybe keep those, I forget how many people you said had been picked up at least 10 times, that we can actually get them back in a system that maybe does incarcerate them when necessary and maybe does get them the services they need otherwise?
So there is some legislation about funding for some of those jail facilities that lack the bed space, but nothing has moved forward as far as I know, and I saw an update this morning, but it's still being talked about in the legislature and nothing's moved forward so far. And then we're not sure who's going to get that funding. So we may put in for it, but it's not guaranteed.
Okay, and then also on the legislative side, I know one of the criticisms of Prop 47 specifically was that it didn't have any sort of requirement that people actually enter into drug and alcohol counseling, therapy, whatever you want to call it, or any of those other corrective educational opportunities. Do you know if legislatively any of that is moving forward?
I'm unaware if there's any legislation on that.
That's very disappointing, but thank you. I wanted to touch also just very briefly on this question about housing. We've heard it come up in relation to a number of other issues, but I think this is something that the county and all of us working together in partnership really need to be very focused on. This, the figure that we have less than 2% vacancy rate in Placer County, but it's actually substantially smaller than that when you look at workforce and low-income housing. We really need to figure out a way to help address that. Obviously not part of today's discussion, but certainly.
We'll have the sheriff get right on that.
Yeah, but certainly part of I think the larger policy discussion for all of us at the county, and I'm really gonna hope that the sheriff's office and probation and everybody at the county who has an interest in this is engaged in that conversation as we move forward. And I just really want to thank the three departments for working so well together, being very responsive to our request that you come back to us with a plan, and really thinking across departments and across boundaries and really trying to break down those silos that we've seen. So my sincere thanks to all of you for your efforts on this.
May I? Regarding your question on Prop 47, without waiting for legislation to correct that problem issue, we are working, we did note that Prop 47 did de-incentify treatment for offenders. And we are working in drug court and Prop 36 to create more incentives for offenders who may not see the need to do that because there's not a felony to get rid of or longer sentences to defer. So we are working actively with those collaborative courts to create incentive for participation.
Right, thank you.
Yes.
Jim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Agree with a lot of the comments that my board members have made. I'm kind of hesitant to see $1.1 million ongoing costs to address this issue, but I appreciate the collaboration of the Sheriff's Department, Probation, and Health and Human Services to bring a plan forth. I'm glad to see that we're going to have a client services that can address housing. Very, very much needed. That is one of our biggest challenges. I'm going to, I appreciate this report. I would support it, basically for one reason. I want to keep my community safe. And that's what, one of our biggest jobs as a board, on this Board of Supervisors, is to have a safe community. And I appreciate the work the Sheriff's Department has done to put this plan together, along with the other two departments. We can work collaboratively and maybe move forward with this. This is a influx of transients that this board has brought upon itself. And I firmly believe that, but this is an approach to deal with that to keep my community safe. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess, is anyone from the public who'd like to address this item? I apologize before you guys head on.
Susan Farrington again. Thank you for the opportunity to address you. The Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras is strongly in favor of this proposal, and we offer our support and our assistance in working diligently with this collaboration to provide a portal to HMIS and also to provide any additional training, support, and assistance in integrating the best plan possible to do comprehensive assessments and to make sure that each of these individuals are placed in the right existing program in a most expedient manner possible so that the best possible outcomes for each and every individual are met. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisor Wygant, or morning still, probably.
Yep.
Pretty close. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Keith Dieterich. I'm the CEO of the Gathering Inn. I am supportive of this request. I'd like to see definitely the partnership here. To get to Supervisor Euler's comment, over the last 2 years, the Gathering Inn has placed over 230 people back into housing. I think that's an excellent outcome. We are the only shelter in Placer County that serves entire families. We just placed a family of 7 into housing as well, so I think that's important. But the Gathering Inn over the years has a lot of room for improvement as well. And we are very supportive of discussions that are ongoing with the Homeless Resource Council, with HHS, in support of the Marbut report to look for a comprehensive solution to the homeless issue here in Placer County, specifically South Placer County. We had a board meeting at the Gathering Inn just last week. The board has authorized me to make that statement, which I have made. We are interested in being a player in these discussions, and we realize that while the Gathering Inn has done a good job of providing services to the homeless community, we believe that a more comprehensive approach that would put all of the major players in a more compacted program area, because we have a lot of fragmentation right now in homeless services, as you know, and we believe that having a 24/7 program that would be placed in South Placer County would definitely help the homeless situation. And the Gathering Inn is certainly supportive of those discussions and want to be part of that solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith, if I may.
Yes, you can.
I want to thank you for your work in working with your supporters and your board to come to that conclusion. The only way that this is going to be addressed for the long term is by everyone that has an interest in it playing a role and being at the table. And it's very important that the Gathering Inn be a piece. We want to hear your voice. You guys have been tremendously successful over the years, and the only way that we're going to be able to resolve this is with folks like yourself and what you bring to the table. So thank you.
I appreciate that. Henry Ford once said, and I'm paraphrasing him a little bit, in any issue, try to find a remedy. And this definitely, I think that there's a lot of people of goodwill around the table. I'll be remiss if I didn't mention the cities of Roseville and Rockland, now Lincoln, Kaiser has been supportive of the Gathering Inn, Sutter Hospital, Placer Community Foundation. They're all supporters of the Gathering Inn now. And I think through a comprehensive approach, we can come to a better proposal and a better programming than we currently have now. Yeah.
Thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
David Loy, Executive Director of the Lazarus Project, just to really touch base on the need for housing, which 2003, 2005, 2008, 2010, I've been always saying, if we do not focus on housing that is attainable to those who we're trying to help in the homeless community, we will not find a solution. In January of 2016, the Continuum of Care did a bed count, shelters, transitional, permanent supportive beds. Of all of those beds, during that week, there were 63 available empty beds, of which 47 of them, I believe, were designated for women with children. That means during that week, for the 500 odd homeless people we have, there are only 15 beds available. Simple math, we need more affordable, attainable housing towards this population. In regards to what Sheriff and HHS is presenting, I think it's a fantastic idea to bring a collaborative effort and safety towards the community. I would just really want to say, in my experience and in my research, the communities, the counties that have successfully addressed this problem, you have seen counties, cities, nonprofit, businesses, and faith-based all sitting at the same table, communicating and building relationship, and that has brought about what Jack has just said, the long-term solutions, because people like David Loy at the Lazarus Project work with Keith Dietrich at the Gathering Inn, who work with Susan Farrington, the head of the Homeless Resource Sierra Council. I would highly encourage one of these liaisons or a high-level decision maker from the Sheriff Department to attend each and every homeless council with the other nonprofits that are sitting at the table. That way we can communicate together what they're doing, what we're trying to do, and how we can create a more seamless way of helping our clientele. I would also encourage that the Sheriff's Department work with the cities as on this issue. As nonprofit of the Lazarus Project, though we do have one home in the unincorporated area on Annabelle, other 3 homes are in the city, we take homeless men and women that are from Roseville, Lincoln, as well as Auburn in the unincorporated area. I'm a small podunk nonprofit. We have 4 residential homes, 21 beds with an annual budget of about $200,000 a year. That's less what many people in this room make. And we provide supportive housing for 21 people. I know everybody's busy, but as a nonprofit executive director, it would be nice to know there's a playbook that all of us are working off of, whether it's the City of Roseville Police Department, the City of Lincoln Police Department, or the Placer County Sheriff. It just makes us our job a whole lot more easier. It gives us nonprofit a common ground with law enforcement to know what decisions we need to make and how we can better service our clientele. So in one sense, what I'm asking for is we need to build relationships so we can better develop a strong business strategy to develop housing with support services, emergency shelter, mental health services, addiction recovery services to those who need them in our community. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Wygant, members of the board, Mr. Bosch. My name's Tom Loop. I'm one of the members of the Board of Right Hand Auburn. And first, I'd like to thank and commend the board for the decision to fund the shelter earlier reached this morning, and also to thank and commend both Chairman Holmes and Chairman Euler for also for their careful consideration of this complicated, vexing issue that is affecting so much of this country and so many cities. And we read the papers, we see the difficult problems in Seattle and San Francisco and Las Vegas and Los Angeles and clearly in Sacramento, where the problems aren't addressed and where this county is trying to do something to improve the situation. Very difficult to solve it. It's not going to be solved, but we can improve it. I think these are important steps that this board is taking to do so. We are very much in favor of the sheriff's proposal. We think this is a very good idea to fund these new positions. First and foremost, I would in fact agree with Chairman Holmes that this situation to protect members of the North Auburn community is a very important one, and the people have a right to expect that. I know that's something that Chairman Euler also, all the members of the board have discussed, and that is an important consideration without question. Secondly, I think it's important that members of the homeless community, whether they're people who are in the shelter or not in the shelter, all of them, we have a right to expect law-abiding behavior. We have a right to expect compliance with efforts from people who are generous enough to donate time and money and energy, or from our government that's donating or funding helpful measures. We have a right to expect reasonable efforts on the people we're trying to serve, that they comply and that they participate and they try to take advantage of good programs that we're talking about putting into place and are in place. So we do highly recommend this proposal from the Sheriff's Office. We think it's an important step to encourage appropriate behavior, lawful behavior, and if it has also an effect, that Chairman Holmes says he's concerned that this is a problem that has been created with this influx. I think the numbers from Mr. Marbut would counter that claim, but I don't dispute that there probably are some people that have come to North Auburn from out of town. And to the extent that has happened, it's difficult to give real numbers on that. We can all differ on that. But if people from out of town know that if they do come to Placer County, whether it's South County or this area, that law enforcement does have a role, has a key role, and that law-abiding behavior is required, it's expected, and that if you're going to be receiving services, we're also expecting compliance and cooperation and an honorable effort to try to improve your own situation. So we hope this recommendation from the Sheriff's Office is approved. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
I don't want to interrupt Chairman Wygant, but if I can just make a couple of comments real quick so we don't keep repeating the same theme. It may be a subtle nuance to some, but I need to point out, this is not, excuse me, this is not a sheriff office proposal, nor is it a sheriff office request, excuse me. This is a collaborative approach from the sheriff's office, probation, and HHS on a plan that you could choose to implement. And it may be a nuance to some. Just want to be clear, this is not a sheriff office proposal, nor is it a sheriff office request.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. Next speaker, or anyone else? Public wish to address this?
Ooh, it's the most popular man in Placer County.
Did you want to come up and talk about your proposal?
Did I propose to you? Good morning, Sheriff Ed Bonner. And I just want to commend the team for the work that they put into this. And it is a plan. It's not a comprehensive plan. It's a collaborative plan between 3 players in the criminal justice world. You know, Chairman Wygant, Kirk, your points are well taken. And I think that there probably are some legal hurdles that we need to overcome to share all the data, or find, maybe HHS is recipient, because I can give them my stuff. They may not be able to give me theirs, but that's something that will work out. But I want to just kind of focus on one thing, my pride in the effort. I really think this is a great first step, and it is not done because as a true collaborative, there are more voices to be heard. To go, Prop 47, there's nothing happening on it. Nothing. There's no will in Sacramento to change or fix any of the consequences. But one of the things that we've done over the years, and I'm really proud of, we have dedicated a person to a homeless liaison. And Zach Poise is in the room, and there he is. He's magnificent, as are the people that went before him. And to your point, one of the things I think that this plan offers, more Zach Poises. He works 4 days a week. If he's training, he isn't there. But he is a man who is committed to this population. He's committed to their success. And I think what Mr. Euler says, I agree with. I think that there is no solution. Nobody solved it yet. You know? I mean, if you were to go way back, I think I mentioned a couple of board members, Jesus was homeless. He was born in a manger. Seriously. So no one has solved this crisis yet. We won't solve it, but can we solve it for somebody? Can we find that person and get them housing? Can we find that person, keep their family together? That's what we can do. And this is a start of that. And how it eventually takes form, I don't know. But the fact we've started, and the fact that conversations are going to follow, but I really think that a key component of this, because how do we get involved? How does sheriff do we just go out, look for people, look scary or homeless? No, conduct. Our neighbors call, our friends call, our business community call, because their conduct screams out. And who are you going to call? Sheriff's office, right? What I would like to see as a result of this is not the solution. Again, I don't think we can solve the homeless issue, but can we solve it for people, one person at a time? I think we can. This is the start. Father Mike said it, and I really liked it. I wrote it down. I'm going to steal it from him. Want peace. Want peace in our neighborhoods. I want peace in our business centers, so people can come and spend money, get those tax dollars, in peace. And I want peace for our residents. I want them to live in peace. And I think that there's nothing perfect in the world. There's no perfect plan. I really think this is a pretty cool start. So, thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Is there anyone else from the public?
Good morning, Bridget Barnes. As you know, I'm with Right Hand Auburn, but I wanted to come up and speak for just a minute on a slightly different tact. You heard it today from 4 agencies here, and there's been mention, Susan mentioned it briefly, and the issue of affordable housing has come up a couple of times here. Your planning department has been meeting with the affordable housing group, made a series of recommendations, which you approved a couple of months ago, I think, related to trying to help with second homes and secondary housing on residences. But that's a very small part. I'm going to put on my developer hat right now, my developer lawyer hat. This is not just a problem for Placer County, but what you have is you have a situation where the combination of environmental regulations, and now I'm referring to, for example, all of the requirements regarding upgraded glass in terms of energy efficiency, insulation, the width on the codes, and this isn't just Placer County's fault, okay? We've got LEED standards that are now applied. Everyone up here who knows anything about it, the whole green code standards, all of that added to the fact that the regional water quality requirements that have affected hookups, et cetera, have jacked the price of new construction out of control. You can't sit down with general contractors or developers and realize, I mean, you cannot bring nonprofit housing on unless there's a significant portion of it being donated right now. And it's not just in Placer County. But that means that when you're looking at the solutions, Supervisor Euler, or any of you that are in, Supervisor Weigand, anybody who's spent a lot of time in business knows what I'm talking about. If we cannot come up with a series of, how shall we put it? If the building department, CEDRA, is not authorized to, for example, waive some of these requirements, we're not going to get them online. And I just want to take a minute and mention that to you. That wasn't part of this issue per se, except that until affordable housing is addressed, until we can get 4-plexes and 8-plexes built and zero lot lines built that can be brought in even with grants so that we can move some of these folks out, we're not going to be able to place them. And the shelter does have a bottleneck. I mentioned that to several of the supervisors in the meetings. We have an existing bottleneck. We have no place to move them. That means that folks who are ready to enter into the programs over on 24/7 can't be easily moved over because we don't have any place to move the people out who are ready to go. Thank you. Thank you for everything you've done.
Thanks, Bridget. Anyone else? Seeing none, noting that our next agenda item is a budget and informal, if you will, direction by the Board of Supervisors regarding that budget where this issue can be discussed and likely will be. There's no direction specifically being sought by the board or from the board at this time. And I would just close with Bridget's response. It's my perspective and hope, and I think shared by some, that we actually acknowledge and understand the relationship between the homeless issue as it relates also and connects to affordable housing. A lot of conversations going on to try to develop that conversation more specifically and definitively, but in partnerships with our cities so that we can look at a countywide best solution that does practically and pragmatically look at any and all options that see what can be done in an achievable manner. So there is clearly a connection, and appreciate your comments and wanted to finish with that. So next we'll go to our last department item, which is budget update on the 2016 and 17 proposed budget. Again, staff giving us perspective with the board providing direction at this point. Thanks. Hmm? That's what I was thinking.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Andy Heath with the County Executive Office. I'm joined today by Becky Regan, also of the County Executive Office. What we'd like to do for you today is do an update on the fiscal year 16-17 budget development process and do something that we did last year that we found very useful as part of the budget development process in obtaining information from your board and bringing back to your board a proposed budget that articulated all of the appropriate information. What we're asking you today is to receive an update on the budget development process for next year as it relates to priority initiatives. These priority initiatives that we're discussing today, which will be 10 of them, by no means represent the full array of priority initiatives, but more so those initiatives that have a one-time or an ongoing demand that we're seeing as part of budget development for 16-17 into the future. So these priority initiatives have those characteristics associated with them. And then provide any necessary direction to staff that your board may wish to do. Presentation outline, we'll go through the budget development process and some of the things that we're seeing as part of challenges and choices this year. And then we'll briefly discuss 10 areas, 10 topics as part of the challenges and choices for the priority and initiative areas. And then the supplemental requests that we're seeing as part of the each of the elements as well. And we'll answer any questions that you might have. As part of the development process this year, we asked the departments early in late December to develop what we call the State of the Department, where all departments in the county were asked to identify some of those things that they saw as priorities or initiatives or significant funding requirements that they saw imminently and into the future, putting a demand on discretionary general fund sources. Departments did turn those in, and then in January 2016, up in the Tahoe meeting, we did have a priorities workshop with your board where we actually articulated some of the things that we were seeing that resonated as priority items in these state of the departments that were returned. In March 2016, we did a fiscal year 15-16 mid-year update where we informed your board about where we thought carryover fund balances in the major funds for the county were going to end up. And then tried to give you a snapshot of what the 16-17 budget process looked like and what we were up against in developing that budget. The March 2016 information was based on all of the information that had been submitted by departments by that time where they had turned their budgets in early March. Today, May 2016, we're with the challenges and choices, so we'll give you some more information that we're finding as we've developed the budget process this year. And what you're likely to find as part of the proposed budget when it comes back to your board on June 7th, 2016. What this slide shows is some of the things that we're seeing as part of the development of the budget process and the demands on discretionary funding that we're finding in two funds predominantly. Keeping in mind that almost 75% of all the services in the county, the direct operating services, are provided by the general fund and the public safety fund. And then also the Public Safety Fund receives 55% of its annual revenue support from the general fund as a general fund contribution. This analysis was conducted to assume a flat general fund contribution to the Public Safety Fund, so that has not been trued up yet. Ultimately, what the county will do, what we will do is when the budget is approved, we will make sure that the Public Safety Fund obviously has enough funding and that the general fund support is balanced accordingly. So for that reason, we're taking both of these funds and combining them for purposes of this analysis. When we came to your board in March of 2016 with the mid-year update, we identified that the carryover fund balances in the general fund and the public safety fund would be approximately $21.8 million and $3.3 million respectively. What you also see here is another $3.1 million that is going to likely be a recommended cancellation of reserves in the public safety fund for a project that will be discussed as part of this presentation today. So the amount available basically to start the fiscal year 16-17 budget process before considering any revenues and expenditures as part of the base budget is $28.2 million. That's what we anticipate will be available as a beginning source of revenues for both of those funds combined. When we put the base budget together, and keeping in mind that the base budget is just an update of what it's going to cost for all of the services as they're provided today. So, and very minor adjustments to service levels as required either by regulatory framework or otherwise. But those costs in the general fund we're finding will be about $8.2 million of net county cost, which will draw on that $21.8 million carryover, and $10.1 million in the public safety fund, for a total of $18.3 million. So essentially, $18.3 million is required to provide the commensurate level of service to what you're seeing the county currently provide. That will come out of the carryover fund balance and reserve cancellation of $28.2, leaving just under $10 million, $9.9 million as budget resources remaining after addressing base budget requirements. That $10 million is essentially ongoing and or one-time money that is available to your board for discretionary purposes that are submitted as supplemental requests by the departments throughout the budget process.
When we put the supplemental budget requests in order, and we're looking at them, and we're vetting through those, what this analysis does today, and what you'll be presented with today, is information that articulates about $8 million of that $9.9 million being added into the proposed budget that you'll likely see on June 7th, leaving about $1.9 million pursuant to this discussion today as well. Caveat here. This analysis is conservative, okay? Proposed budgets are put together conservatively. They're put together conservatively for a couple of reasons. Main reason is we don't know what a lot of the revenue drivers are going to be ultimately until the roll valuations are available for property tax. Property tax, as you're aware, is the largest discretionary revenue source that the county receives. County receives approximately $140 million in property tax on an annual basis. And as such, wide swings in property tax could have a wide variant, could cause a wide variance from proposed to final budget. And as such, the proposed budget is put together conservatively from a revenue perspective. Likewise, on the expenditure side, expenditure budgets are also put together conservatively, where there is a practice whereby all funded positions are budgeted for the entire year. Keeping in mind that the county does budget just over 2,500 positions, many of those which are in the general fund and the public safety fund, they're budgeted at full cost. Ultimately, it's not practical that all those positions will be filled all year long. So you're going to have some savings there as well. What I've done here is just giving you a snapshot on what we're seeing in our 5-year model and what carryover fund balance requirements will be, are likely to be in the future. You can focus on the bar graph over there, looking at fiscal year 16, 17, and the 4 years that begin with that year. About $16.8 million to $21.5 million in carryover fund balance will be required, according to the 5-year model, and again, this is put together conservatively, for those 4 years. That is basically the amount that will be required to balance the base budget each year in carryover fund balance. Those numbers do include a contingency funding. So in the general fund, budget and financial policy requires that the county fund a 1.5% contingency, which is just over $6 million today. So that $16.8 million does include that $6 million as well. So assuming we don't use the contingency, there's about $10.8 million to $15.5 million that will be required in carryover fund balance from 16-17 to 19-20 respectively. Moving over to the table and the tableized information, what this shows is what your board has dedicated in the past towards one-time activity as contributions from the general fund. This does not include the contribution to the public safety fund from the general fund, which is about $85 million that was in 16-17, and for purposes of this analysis is static at that amount for $85 million. Above and beyond that, in the past and with the 15-16 budget, and likewise with the 16-17 budget as it's being prepared, the county does contribute an amount of its discretionary base to other funds for specific purposes. What you see in the first column is the amount of the discretionary base that went into the proposed budget, the final budget actually, for fiscal year 15-16. You have a longstanding contribution of about $8.3 million that goes to the road fund and the capital projects fund, $3.8 million and $4.5 million respectively. This is essentially money that is just provided by the general fund to these funds for purposes in those funds on an annual basis. The library fund also receives an ongoing amount from the general fund, where the general fund pays for the library director, and then it also pays for all but $100,000 of the 87 costs on any given year. That's the amount. The 593 was the amount that was required in 15-16. Fire fund gets a standing contribution of about $1.1 million to cover CAL FIRE contract costs and dispatch costs. And then the debt service fund also gets $3.2 million to cover any debt obligations that the county has that are secured by the general fund and require a contribution from the general fund for that reason. In 15-16,
sorry, just before we move off this slide, I want to make sure people understand that the numbers at the bottom, the totals there are millions. It's not $13,379. It's $13,379,000.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly right. You may recall, with this year's budget and the 15-16 budget, your board did allocate additional funding pursuant to an amount of one-time funding that was received from the state of California and some other fund balance carryover that materialized by final budget. Gave an additional $2 million to the road fund, additional $6.7 million to the capital fund. Some money went towards the open space fund, about $1 million there, and then the library fund also got $400,000 in one-time money as well. So last year, out of the discretionary base, your board did allocate just over $23 million in one-time and/or ongoing funding to those special funds. In the 16-17 base, what's being built in so far is the standard contributions that have always been built in for contributions to these funds. The $8.3 million to the capital projects fund and the road funds stays there, 3.7 to the road fund and 4.5 million to the capital projects fund. Library fund has not been trued up yet. We're waiting for the final A87 numbers before we look at that. So the placeholder of just under $600,000 is there. The $1.1 million to the fire fund, and then the debt service fund has been updated, and that will require about $3.4 million from the general fund to satisfy debt obligations for the coming fiscal year. This $13.3 million is essentially within that 16.8 that you see over in the bar chart, where you've got 16.8 that's required, but 13.3 of that is built into arriving at that number. With that context on the budget development and realizing that discretionary funds available from the general fund are limited, what we'd like to do now is go through some of the priority initiative areas that we found have some sort of an impact either now or into the future on general fund contributions or on general fund funding sources into the near future. The first, I think there are five new elements on here that are new from last year. I'll probably be able to pick those out. And Becky Regan will be covering the first 4 items, and then I'll take it back over and cover the last 6.
Right. Thank you, Andy. Good morning, Chairman Wygant, members of the board. Okay, the first area under consideration are 3 aspects having to do with continued implementation of the Criminal Justice Master Plan. The first area is to continue our analysis of costs and funding alternatives associated with constructing a new crime lab and with replacing the coroner's facility. The second item is the second phase of the sheriff's 2-year plan for fully deploying the South Placer jail operations, and that would be the additional staffing necessary to bring on the full bed capacity in that facility, and also staffing the South Placer booking station. And finally, within this area, we need to just determine funding source for the $2.1 million, which is the county share for the $9.5 million grant program from the state that we were successful in receiving to construct a mental health housing unit in South Placer. This would be a highly beneficial addition to the correctional system, and I would offer might also be of assistance in dealing with some of the homeless issues that we are facing here in the county.
Just want to interrupt that just real quick. On these tables that are being prepared, these tables have been prepared consistent with one another. So for each of the 10 items, you'll see the same information in each table. The fiscal year 15-16 final budget amount is the amount of discretionary funding essentially that was either built into the base or provided as a one-time contribution pursuant with the proposed budget or with the final budget carryover fund balance in 15-16. 16-17 recommended amount is an amount that is either funded with the base or will be recommended as a supplemental, likely to be recommended to your board on June 7th as a supplemental for approval. 16-17 to be considered are amounts that are not included as part of the budget process right now. And then the total consideration is simply the 16-17 recommended plus the 16-17 to be considered.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so the next area are what we call general public safety support. There are 2 items within this area. It has been 10 years since we last tested the market for indigent defense services, and we are midway through a request for proposals process with the Superior Court and other stakeholders on this item. And we have placed $1.1 million as a placeholder for consideration as we continue that process, which we are hoping to do by midsummer. The other item within this area is $3.1 million in anticipated costs for replacing the Tiburon inmate management system for the Sheriff's Office, and we do recommend cancellation of reserves for this purpose.
Mr. Chair, if I may quickly, would you go back 2 slides? I want to make sure I'm clear on what Andy's explanation was of the top line. Go back one more, please. Thank you. So, just so that I'm clear on top line, you're looking at in the 15-16 final budget, we had $1.477 million. 16 recommended is inclusive of that 1.4, so what you're saying is that we're recommended, so we got a baseline of the 1.4, we're recommending in the 16-17 an additional roughly $823,000 in order to reach the recommended?
So what this said, the $1.4 million is related to specifically the 25 positions that were added last year for the first phase of the implementation of the 180
Okay.
beds, or the phasing in of the 180 beds. That amount has been absorbed into the base as an ongoing amount.
So in
it
other
is-
words, the recommended includes that, so.
The recommended is on top of that.
Oh.
Yes. So it is on top of that. This is, the $2.3 million is for the additional 30 positions.
Okay, and that's what I need to make sure that, so what you're saying is that in this specific component of the criminal justice budget, when we're discussing the master plan as it relates to these things, we already have nearly $1.5 million. You're suggesting an additional 2.3 for a 3.8 new baseline.
That's correct.
That's the key that I was missing. That's what I'm not understanding as I look at that. Okay, so then,
And then that would be 55 total positions.
okay, so that takes us up to the 3.8 million is actually what is recommended then for 16-17.
Correct.
So then the 2.1 would be the supplemental beyond what's currently recommended?
Yeah, the $2.1 million is related to the grant for the acute mental health
Right.
Facility, and that would need to be funded also by the general fund from either reserves or some other discretionary source that materializes with carryover fund balance.
Okay, so then by the time we get to the total consideration, you've already backed out what we already have allocated, and that is the consideration simply in new expenditures at our discretion.
Right, what's backed out of the, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. That was the key part I was missing.
I appreciate you asking the question, actually, that was good for me. So in addition to that, on this specific item, how much is the grant again? Refresh my memory.
$9.5 million we received from the
$9.5
state,
million.
yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so moving on to the next item, which is homelessness and affordable housing. Clearly, we've had discussion this morning on that item, highlighting the collaborative effort between the 3 departments. We would be seeking your guidance on moving forward with that $1.2 million identified there. And then also, we have received an additional request from the Gathering Inn of $150,000. We are conducting further conversations with Gathering Inn to better understand their funding constraints and potential solutions, and to include identifying fair share funding approaches with city stakeholders. And then, as your board is aware, staff continue our community outreach and development of land use recommendations in response to passage of the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, in preparation, and also in preparation for possible voter initiative that may be occurring this November regarding recreational marijuana. We have treated this as another placeholder item within our discussions today. And the point being that enforcement would be a necessary component of any regulatory approach your board would so direct. These costs here reflect some initial discussions with the Ag Commissioner, should he be placed in the position for regulation implementation. But there would also, we think, be other costs within the county for implementation regardless of the approach your board were to take when we come back later this summer. So again, we've treated this as a placeholder for now.
And if I could ask, and I'm presuming that that does not include any potential revenue sources.
That's correct.
So is that why you put, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, is that why you put the cost recovery piece down here? In that?
Right.
Because it could
Have
end
to
up
look
paying
at it.
for itself? Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah, depending on the direction your board provides.
Okay, moving forward, this is an element that was on last year's Challenges and Choices, and we expanded it to include infrastructure development, capital facilities financing plan, and infrastructure development. Last year, your board contributed about just over $13 million by final budget towards capital facilities and in one-time sources. This year, what's recommended as part of the proposed budget is $8.3 million, and this is just the $4.5 million standing contribution from the general fund to the capital projects fund, and $3.8 million to the road fund. The amount to be considered are elements that were recommended by the Department of Public Works and Facilities through capital projects and roads in looking at an additional $2.5 million towards deferred maintenance, a couple of $1 million towards roads, which your board did do this year, and then some money for trail maintenance as well, and then some other costs for other capital projects. So about $4.4 million to be considered there for a total of $12.7. $4.4 million is not yet built in to the budget. The 8.3 is, and that's consistent with the budgets from the past. One thing that we're looking at this year, before we recommend some additional funding into the capital projects fund, is updating the capital facilities financing plan. Up to 2011, your board had received on an annual basis at its July meeting in Tahoe an update on the capital facilities financing plan, which discussed large-scale projects that the county saw over a 10-year horizon as being necessary for building in the county. That plan is being updated, working closely with DPW facilities and also working with the county's finance committee on bringing that plan tentatively back to your board in July for consideration. As part of this plan, there will be funding mechanics that will be built into it, some of which may require discretionary sources. Discretionary sources in the sense that we may be recommending as part of the policy to recharacterize the former RDA increment, which is now received as RIPTIF money, Redevelopment Property Tax Trust Fund money, specifically for infrastructure purposes into the near future. You may recall with the approval of this year's budget, your board did direct that the amount of money that was received or anticipated to be received for RIPTIF this year was directed into the infrastructure reserve in the general fund. So that's where that sits. So we may be looking at a policy implication for that and bringing that forward in the near future. Additionally, to the extent that your board does decide to undertake projects as part of the capital facilities financing plan that need to have debt associated with them, there will be a debt service cost, which ultimately requires additional general fund money to pay that on an annual basis for the life of the debt. So these are some of the things that we'll be looking at as part of the capital facilities financing plan and bringing that back, and ultimately what will be recommended with final budget in terms of capital financing. Moving on to environmental sustainability, this was also one of last year's Challenges and Choices. With the final budget this year, we actually recommended and your board approved $1 million transfer to the county's open space fund. Right now, there's about $3.6 million in that open space fund. Prior to the recession, your board had regularly contributed discretionary funding into this fund, and up until last year, haven't done so for some time. There's nothing recommended at this point in time. What is being looked at right now are a couple of key supplemental proposals. One that will likely be included as part of the proposed budget, given where we are at with the program, and that's the PCCP, the Placer County Conservation Plan, and the request for $925,000 to basically bring that plan to completion. Right now, that's not built into the proposed budget, but you may recall that there was about $1.9 million left for allocation, and it's very likely that staff will be recommending that $900,000 out of that $1.9 million. Also, at the
And
end,
if I could,
yes,
for clarity, mostly for, just make sure I'm crystal clear, but so the $1 million typically would go into our open space reserve, and that would typically be used, not necessarily, but typically used for some kind of land acquisition, conservation easement, Hidden Falls Park, something like that. The 925 more specifically is going for the cost of finishing up the PCCP, which would be legal fees, consultants who are writing the environmental documents and finishing up the conservation strategy,
Exactly
correct?
right.
So those would end with the completion of the PCCP.
Yes.
And then the other would be something that the board should consider
So-
as we move forward post-PCCP completion.
There was a request for the $1 million for land acquisitions, and we're putting that aside for final budget as well to see what.
Well, I think, for me, I think Kirk and I are kind of on the same page as it relates to our expectations post-PCCP implementation, but I think we would want to have a good policy discussion about what happens to that non-regulatory driven open space component. I think we need to plug that into our strategy when we wrap it up, so, for what it's worth.
Okay, move forward. Library system planning. With the library system planning, you may recall that with this year's budget, your board allocated $400,000 in one-time funding from the general fund to the library fund, $200,000 for sustainability reserve, realizing that there's a fiscal imbalance, fiscal insustainability in the library fund where it requires some level of fund balance carryover, cancellation of reserves, or additional general fund contribution to balance the budget from year to year. $200,000 sustainability reserve, and then another $200,000 was set aside for the RFID capital project for the library system as a whole. What's being recommended with the 16-17 budget and being built in at this point in time is $275,000 from the general fund, $175,000 related specifically for materials to further the library's implementation of the strategic plan, which 3 initiatives of the strategic plan are to reverse erosion, build capacity for the future, and modernize operations. We continue to implement facets of that over the next several years, and this will help the library get towards that end. The other $100,000 that's being recommended is for basically the balance of A87 costs that is not covered by the general fund, and just have the A87 costs fully paid for by the general fund each year because of its fluctuating amount from year to year. Total to be considered is about $413,000, and that's just an A87 true-up. That will have a revenue source attached to it as well, so that will be in and out for total consideration of $688,000. As I mentioned, the library continues to implement its strategic plan, and as such, the proposed budget will likely be recommending closure of the Meadow Vista and Loomis branches with the proposed budget. We have been working very closely with the town of Loomis to repurpose the library building and are trying to come to a conclusion on that before the proposed budget so that we can bring that back to your board as part of the plan to effectuate those closures. Fire funding sustainability. This was also on last year's challenges and choices. Each year, your board does contribute $1.1 million in general fund funding to the Fire Control Fund, where that $1.1 million is used to offset costs related to the CAL FIRE contract and for dispatch services and other small things in that fund as well. Your board controls 7 zones of benefit in CSA 28 in addition to the Fire Control Fund. And an important point on this, and why it is a challenge and a choice, is there are a couple of those zones of benefit, particularly the North Auburn Ophir zone, and the Dry Creek zone of benefit that have fiscal imbalances. In other words, each year when we budget their revenues and expenditures, their expenditures are more than their revenues. We're seeing that happen again this year. In the North Auburn Ophir area, it's about a $400,000 imbalance. We are projecting, however, a carryover fund balance of just about the same amount. So the carryover fund balance will cover all of the $400,000 imbalance. But the imbalance also includes what will likely be recommended to add the 3rd Battalion Chief back to the North Auburn Ophir Fire District to basically support rapid response. We're finding that the number of calls, particularly in that zone, is increasing, that the majority of the calls in CSA 28 are in the North Auburn Ophir area. And the proximity of the 2 battalion chiefs that remain, they're close to each other, leaving one area of the North Auburn Ophir area vulnerable to something that may require quick response. In the absence of a battalion chief, just wouldn't happen. So we've been working very closely with CAL FIRE and will likely be recommending that as part of the proposed budget. What this $1 million also does is it allows the county to maintain the equipment fund, equipment replacement plan, which is on par. So we're moving forward on that as well. This is also up here because of its connection to the fire control, the fire consolidation study that's currently underway. Fire consolidation study at some point in time in the near future will come back to your board with some recommendations on how to proceed forward. There may be, at some point in time, funding that could be recommended or could be required, and that will roll into this, and also include impacts on your board's governed zones of benefit, and especially those that are fiscally in a fiscal challenge situation right now. So that will be coming back to your board in the future. Financial system replacement. This was presented in January at the priorities workshop by our auditor controller as a necessary element for moving forward from a more efficient, more economical standpoint with respect to reporting requirements related to financial system. Our current financial system, our PAS system, is significantly outdated. It's a legacy system that's 20 years old. And it's very limited in its capacity to provide information, specifically information as we continue to implement the priority-based budgeting process. Replacing a financial system will really allow us to look at efficiencies and achieve a cost benefit that will likely significantly reduce costs in the future. With the financial system, however, we're also looking at potentially replacing the county's human resource payroll management system, otherwise known as ACORN. Primarily to look at efficiencies that may be gained by having one suite of systems as opposed to two different systems, and ultimately potentially rolling the information as a hosted solution where everything is done in the cloud per se. We're evaluating all of that information right now. This year, we're recommending the same thing we recommended last year, where through a countywide internal service fund, we'll be allocating $750,000 in costs to all departments and all appropriations across the county to take that $750,000 and basically put it on hold for future system replacement costs. Right now, we're continuing to evaluate the systems and funding options and sources, working closely with the auditor controller on that. And it's very likely in the near future your board will be seeing a request to issue an RFP for the system or systems as a whole. So you'll be expecting that in the near future. Finally, last but certainly not least, is post-employment liabilities. Your board has a long-standing history of funding long-term liabilities to a great degree to demonstrate that the county does intend on paying those long-term liabilities and, more importantly, provide benefits to the employees in the future and offsetting the cost of those benefits, which have grown over time. The county has a history of funding the ARC, or the annual required contribution, on an annual basis. We have two liabilities, basically, that we're talking about here. We have the OPEB, other post-employment benefits, which is health benefits at retirement, and we also have the retirement benefits that are provided by CalPERS through its miscellaneous and safety retirement plans. As I mentioned, the county does fund the ARC every year, where the annual required contribution includes the pay-as-you-go costs, the costs for what it costs for the current year, and then also a component that amortizes the unfunded liability over time. The amortization period for the OPEB was reduced from 30 years to 15 years about 18 months ago by your board in response to a desire to pay that liability down quicker. So we have about 14 years left on that. And then the CalPERS liabilities are set at a rolling year 30-year average. So it will be some time before those are paid off. The unfunded liability in the OPEB is about $100 million roughly. And then the unfunded liability in both of the retirement systems combined is just over $400 million. Your board last year dedicated an additional $5.8 million in one-time funding two long-term liabilities, $2.9 million specifically to the OPEB, and $2.9 million to a retirement, and looking at a potential to begin to address the long-term liabilities associated with retirement. We are looking at that right now, where we're actually considering different options by which we can create a retirement trust, similar to what we have for our OPEB trust, a Section 115, IRS Section 115 trust fund, where we can put that money aside specifically for this purpose. But we're also looking at the potential for perhaps allocating that $2.9 million in additional funding to the OPEB to pay that off sooner. Once one of these liabilities or both of these liabilities are fully paid off, what that does is it frees up an ongoing amount in the general fund for consideration by other priorities, because that portion of the ARC, the amortized portion of the ARC, will be fully paid. And ultimately, you may be able to pay your pay-as-you-go, your annual contribution requirements with interest earnings in those trust funds. So we're looking at that right now, and likely with final budget, to the extent funding becomes available, we will recommend allocation of additional funding towards either one of these plans. That's a synopsis of the 10 issues that we identified this year as part of Challenges and Choices. And at this point in time, I'm happy to answer any questions your board might have.
Jim.
Thank you, Andy. I just wanted to talk about the healthcare benefits, the retiree healthcare benefits. So you're not proposing adding any additional funds to the CalPERS trust at this time? But that could change when we true up the books in August. There's more
Correct.
money left over. And so this is just a preliminary 30,000-foot level analysis. We really don't know exactly what we're going to have until we true up. The books close in July, the end of July, and then early August or late August, we'll have a more clear.
That's right.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Kirk.
Well, since the agenda item includes any necessary staff direction, I'll just run through the 10 different areas and give you my thoughts on all 10 of them real quick. How's that? So, criminal justice master plan, I'm fine with what you're proposing, including the additional of the supplemental as it relates to the acute mental health grant. On the public safety support component, where we're looking at $3.1 million to fund automated systems implementations. Anytime we talk about additional automation, I want to see the associated cost savings. And so if we can demonstrate the operational cost savings that justify the $3.1 million expenditure up front, fine. Let's take a look at it. Happy to consider that. Homelessness and affordable housing, the $1.2 million that you're looking for the what we just discussed here in terms of the additional staffing for sheriff, probation, health and human services, I'm fine with that. Medical marijuana, not fine with that. You could strike those in my opinion. The capital facilities financing plan, again, I'm going to come back to as we look at spending the dollars we've set aside over time out of our capital facilities budget, and this goes back to conversations Supervisor Montgomery and I have had, priorities need to be based, I believe, on what provides the best return on investment. This is where we get back to that, analyzing what is the impact on the ground for an infrastructure improvement in terms of then utilizing the ground around it, driving up the value of that, going back to, as you identified right when we started this whole conversation, that, what is it, roughly 63% of our general fund is property tax that comes into us. So whatever investment we have that has the greatest driver on increasing assessed valuation, thereby driving up our property tax, is where our priorities should be in terms of those capital improvements, in my opinion. And then when you've actually taken the step of analyzing a capital improvement on that scale, where you say, if we spend $10 million to put in this interchange or this section of road or this bridge or this sewer line, over the next 10 years, we anticipate the absorption of this ground around it at this kind of a valuation generating this much property tax, you'll see an actual year-over-year return on investment. That's when we get to Jennifer's point of, okay, now does it make sense to actually use debt to finance those improvements? But until we've done that upfront analysis that allows us to really drill down on this particular improvement yields this kind of year-over-year ROI, we're not going to be there. So I would very much encourage us to make our decisions on those capital facilities financial plans based on that, and have our board be able to make it.
If I could just
Yeah.
plug in quickly on that variation, I'm expecting actually that kind of information as it relates to the SIA update. Is that what we're?
Yep.
Yep, okay.
Okay.
If I can jump in
Jack?
real quick on just kind of piggybacking on what Kirk is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kirk, but if TIF, tax increment financing out in the SIA, does get us to that ROI, you're okay with that? Is that what?
I'm willing to consider that.
it?
Yes,
Okay, good.
absolutely.
All right, okay, I
Yes.
just wanted to get that clarified. Thanks.
Yeah. On environmental sustainability, specifically as it regards PCCP, obviously we got to spend the money to get this thing across the finish line. But my very clear preference is any additional dollars we spend on acquiring any open space will only be to the extent that we need to meet our stay-ahead provisions within the PCCP, and we're spending the dollars knowing that we are essentially creating the bank for whatever resource that we are acquiring, whether it's a Oak Woodlands habitat that we're acquiring because at some point somebody is going to need to come in and buy the mitigation from us. So we've met the stay-ahead. So that's, from this point forward, I think we're far enough along in the PCCP, unless there is, like we saw with Hidden Falls Park, where you had an open space acquisition, but it has a significant recreational amenity associated with. That's, I think, a separate conversation going more back toward facilities. But as it regards the conversation associated with purchases for be they conservation easements, fee title, whatever the case may be, I'm only interested in pursuing those as long as it meets our stay-ahead provisions in the PCCP. Libraries. The question on I have a question mark next to the to be considered. I don't see, and maybe you said it and I missed it, I don't see a narrative associated with the $413,000 that you're asking to be considered beyond the recommended to.
Yeah, that would be, there'll be a revenue that's associated with that as well. All that is a potential true-up of the 87 costs for the coming year. Right.
Thank you. All right, then no questions there. Fire sustainable, I had no comment on the rest. Thank you.
And Jennifer had her light on next.
Okay, I'll go backwards since we just ended up at the end of it, though the slides aren't quite keeping pace. I wanted to follow up on Jim's comments about the post-employment liabilities and just really clarify that the reason that there is nothing plugged into this right now, although we take action on it every year, is because we do have to wait for that August true-up. I think we should continue when we have that August true-up to try to whittle away at these obligations. I think it's in the best interest of all the taxpayers in Placer County, and let's continue to whittle away at those. So whatever windfall or whatever term you want to use for that true-up in August, let's make sure that goes, as it has historically, towards these obligations. On the financial system replacement, the same concern that Kirk raised, I want to see the return on investments on that. What do we think we're going to achieve in terms of savings for doing this? I realize that both PASS and Acorn are clunky old systems that don't work well or are incredibly inefficient. That to me just cries out for some sort of analysis of how making these more efficient is going to help us and help the taxpayers of Placer County. So I have an expectation before we take any action on that we'll see that analysis. On the Placer Fire Funding Sustainability, this is something that we are going to again continue to fund. I think it's important to reiterate that part of the vision of the use of the funding on this, if I'm not wrong, is that we will help implement some of those recommendations in the Fire Services Consolidation Report, which is still currently in draft form. It's been commented on. It's still being commented on, I believe, by some of the local districts. There are, I believe, 7 districts that are in that sort of critical 6 districts, I think, that are in that critical place, including 2 within our own CSA 28. and that some of those dollars are going to be used to help audit the districts that are struggling and come up with business plans. And my expectation is that the county, along with the other districts that are struggling, the independent districts, the county is going to step in and help fund that, because we recognize that the districts that are struggling can't bear these costs themselves, and we recognize that there is a value to us partnering in this and leading and participating in it with an analysis of our own shortcomings. So we really need to do that. So just that's my real take on that. In terms of the library system, I'm with Kirk. Don't have a lot of comments on that one, except that I wish there were some magic way that we could come up with a whole bunch more money for the libraries. Doesn't seem to exist. I've tried my magic. On environmental sustainability, I differ a little bit with Kirk. I agree with everything he had to say about the PCCP lands and how we stay ahead in that. But I think Tahoe has a real sustainability focus that is a little bit different from what we're looking at down here on the west end of the county. When we preserve and protect lands in Tahoe, we're doing it, frankly, as an economic driver through recreation and through additional opportunities for folks to come up and spend some time in our beautiful uplands. And that stimulates economic growth in all our small businesses as well. And so I think we should be thinking as well about economic sustainability in Tahoe. On the capital facilities financing plan, I'm really delighted that this is going to come back to us in July tentatively for a policy conversation along the lines of what Supervisor Euler brought up. Let's look at, what is that ROI? But also let's have that policy conversation about what are the expectations of our constituents and what are we hearing from them that they think are really important in terms of infrastructure. Is it roads? Is it bridges? Is it new county facilities? Is it some mixture of all of that? I don't think we've had that conversation in quite a while, and I think it's very important that we do have that conversation. I'm delighted, because I always have to point this out, that in our current capital facilities financing plan sort of vision for the future, we do have the Tahoe Sheriff's Substation and Court planning in there. I think that's really critically important. It's been on our radar for a very long time, and I'm hoping that we can make some progress moving forward on this. On the medical marijuana, I think that cost recovery piece is absolutely critical. Unless we can recover our costs on this, it's something that I'm very skeptical about moving forward on at all. Our policy at the county is things pay for themselves. I mean, that's sort of the plain English language of it. I would have an expectation that if we were to bring forward some sort of policy on cultivation of medical marijuana, that it would pay for itself. Homelessness and affordable housing, I see here some really good things, but I'm concerned that this 1.2 is really only envisioning what was a terrific plan put in front of us today through PCSO, Probation and Health and Human Services. It doesn't get to that actual piece of constructing housing, which we absolutely need to get on as quickly as possible. And I would also just mention that I think we really need to start talking about workforce housing, because this is our workforce that we're trying to get housed here. These are people who have jobs, are working full-time, and can't afford to live here. Affordable housing has a little bit of a negative connotation to it. This is our workforce. We need to make sure that we can house them in, clean, well-lit places. And we've made some great progress on that, both in Kings Beach and in the Bowman area, but we really need to expand our efforts on that. I also just want to clarify on the public safety support side, where we talk about indigent defense, that's public defender. That indigent defense doesn't necessarily resonate with people, and they don't necessarily understand what we're talking about. We're reanalyzing, should we do the public defender in-house, or should we continue with a contract as we have had for many years? And I'm delighted that we're reanalyzing that, because I think it's something that we should certainly revisit at least every couple of years to see if it makes sense. Criminal Justice Master Plan, pretty happy with that as well. And I think those are all my comments. Thank you.
Jack? Then
Yeah,
Jim.
Yeah, I'm going to make this real short. I've got three particular areas that I want to talk about. I'm in fairly good agreement with Kirk and Jen on some particular areas. I want to talk about criminal justice master plan. I think we're moving in the right direction with that. I'm glad to see that we're also moving forward with the crime lab. And one of the things that we talked about when we talked about the crime lab was just the whole concept of independence and how that would fit in to the DA's wheelhouse. But independence is really important, and I think also along that same lines is this whole question and discussion about a public defender. Because once we get a crime lab here, the system looks like it's pretty much tilted in one direction. I've had discussions with Scott Owens, our district attorney, about this, to give him some thoughts on approaches. I've also talked to Becky about certain approaches that we could do that to make things better and ensure that we do have transparency and we do have independence in lab operations and control. My next issue is going to be on the medicinal marijuana issue. Cost recovery is very important. I think it's if we do decide to come back with something, it's a very difficult issue. I know Becky's been having a tremendous amount of output throughout the county, and we had a speaker here earlier, but. One of the things that I do want to emphasize on this particular issue is the difference between enforcement and policy. There's a very, I appreciate anyone's thoughts on any comments with regards to how things are done. But I am very, very adamant at keeping that distinction between enforcement and policy. They're two different worlds, all right? Finally, I want to talk about the fire issues. I know in my area, Dry Creek is one of the issues that has to use reserves. I'm happy to see that we're contemplating some structural changes and going to be kind of working through things to try to make things better. Like I said before, the whole zone of benefit things, I don't know. Nobody has still been able to tell me why we use this and why it works and how it works. So I think, at the end of the day, we're, getting rid of that and putting in something that's more fair for everyone, for the system, is going to be, I think, a vast improvement. So we don't have problems like underfunding OFER, or we don't have problems of underfunding Dry Creek or any of those other areas. And I know that, at least for Dry Creek, as we have these other developments come online, Uriolo Vineyards, Placer Vineyards, a couple of other infill areas out there, that the situation will get better. But the question for me is not just better, it's sustainability. That's the most important, and not just for Dry Creek, a sustainable plan for everyone in the county. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Jim.
Oh, thank you. You've heard my comments about the post-employment liabilities. I appreciate Supervisor Montgomery and Supervisor Rand's comments on the Placer County fire funding sustainability. North Auburn OPERA does have its challenges. They've been working off reserves for the last at least 2, maybe 3 years. And we're extending the contract with Citygate, expediting that contract in order to move faster to find resolution. And I agree about your comment about the zones of benefit. We need to look at that and see if that's going to be a player in our discussion about fire service sustainability. So we're working on that. That's one of my primary goals this fiscal year. Placer County Library System Planning. We're going to be closing the Loomis Library. Thank you, Andy, for helping out with the town of Loomis on that, and the Meta Vista Library. Doing so, I want to make sure that there's enough funding to have a robust library system, and particularly maybe keeping them open 6 days a week, and having the equipment that they need to perform their services. I want to see some robust library system. I agree with the comments about environmental sustainability, and we've talked about homelessness. Affordable housing, I'd rather call it attainable housing for the workforce or anybody that seeks housing. Attainable is more softer. It seems like it's not making someone look like they can't afford to have housing. Medical marijuana is still, I'm still out there trying to figure out which way to go with that, but I don't think that any revenue that we seek from the marijuana ordinance would sustain the enforcement part of that. So I'm concerned about that part. And of course, public safety support, you've heard my talk about that during our discussion about homelessness. So that's where I stand on all these issues. Thank you.
So I'll just throw in a question first. What interest are we currently earning on our reserve for OPEB?
What kind of an interest rate?
What is the interest rate? It was 7.5. I think it's down now. And I'm just curious.
Last year it was flat. It was 0, just because.
Or no interest?
Market conditions. But
the discount rate?
But the discount rate is 7.13%.
Okay, that was my question. So I guess on that notion, obviously, I think we want to prioritize getting that total liability, both the OPEB side and the other, down as quickly as possible.
Okay.
But it strikes me that a good tactic might be to pay off the OPEB first. I kind of like that idea. But one of the key things I'd like to report back on, there was some discussion when we first created the OPEB reserve as to how protected it was from any kind of state reaching into it. Not that they would ever do that. But I want to get a current update as to that question before we consider anything in more detail. In addition to the comments that you've already heard, I'd add on the open space sustainability. I think we're all pretty much on the same page. I would only add maybe that in the short term, as we complete the PCCP documentation, get those contracts signed, as Kirk articulated, we are going to have a need to have a stay-ahead cluster of properties to satisfy those contracts. And I think the current reserves, obviously we've got to pay for the contracts to finish up the contracting, but then those reserves ought to be targeting completing our stay-ahead requirements. After that, I think what we should do, though, is kind of take a second look at the numbers and have a board discussion about exactly what our legacy policy ought to be in the context of the PCCP regulatory requirements. Because I think an overall strategy is where we're going to get the best benefit to our residents, and should include, obviously, the upper elevation component and how that connects to attracting affordable workforce housing and employees even down here. It's all integrally connected. Another question is, so we're targeted to have the adoption of our preliminary budget on June 7th.
Correct.
When will you have the final numbers before that, and are you planning on meeting of all of us individually prior to that June? Because I'm assuming, of course, that we will be winnowing down any differences in the numbers.
We'll have the information sometime in August, first couple of weeks of August.
No, before, when we have a new visitation of the reserves, et cetera, before the June 7th hearing? Won't the list that we have, the 10 items on our list, look somewhat different before June 7th?
Probably not too
Probably not?
different. There'll be a few more recommendations.
All right.
But
Okay.
yeah, pursuant to the comments heard today.
Yep, all right. I think that's it for me at this point in time. But having said that, and with all of us making our comments, is there anyone from the public who'd like to comment on this item?
Thank you. Mr. Wygant, members of the Board of Supervisors, my name is Brian Myers. I'm here today as the co-chair of a committee that consists of 6 of these distressed fire districts. I represent today Forest Hill, Loomis, Newcastle, Penryn, Placer Hills, and South Placer fire districts. Our committee is made up of fire chiefs, administrators, board members and labor representatives of each of those districts. And there are quite a number of them here in the audience today. Just raise your hands. We're here today because you know the distress these fire districts are in. That's why you commissioned the Citygate study. 3 of these districts may not survive this fiscal year. They've eaten their reserves down to almost nothing. Forest Hill, Newcastle, and Penryn may not make it to the end of this fiscal year. Now, I very much appreciate Supervisor Montgomery's comments a little earlier about using some of the fire safety money that's in the budget now to coattail on the Citygate study to look at what needs to be done. We're more than happy to cooperate with audits, with budget plans. But when you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's hard to come up with a budget plan that says, let's put this into reserves, let's put this into equipment. We just don't have the money to come up with those plans now. And if the county's willing to step up and assist us, we're more than willing to participate in that process. The problem that we have and that I want to address with you today is the urgency of the need right now today. It'll take a year, my guess, to digest the Citygate study. I've read it. There's a lot of material in it. It's 110 pages of lots of recommendations, lots of analysis, and it's going to take quite a while for all of us to be able to go through it and digest it, as it will you. And we can't wait that long. These districts are in terrible financial trouble right now. The fire chiefs tried to put in a request for money that totaled about $3.6 million months ago. And the response that we got was, we won't talk about anything with you until the Citygate study is done. So the study is in draft form. It's not released for the public yet. How much longer do we all have to wait? Every day that goes by, these districts are closer and closer and closer to shutting the doors. And if they do have to shut the doors, let's think about the history of what happens when a fire district goes out of business. They merge into the CSA. CAL FIRE administers your CSA, and what happens then? CAL FIRE already says that they're underfunded from you, and they already want more money for just what they're doing now. We've talked to CAL FIRE, and they say it'd be $8 to $12 million for them to contract with you to take over these 3 districts, Forest Hill, Newcastle, and Penryn, if they go out of business. The amount of money we're looking at, $3.6 million, is a Band-Aid that gets us to next year. Some of us are considering our own bond measures. Penryn needs to do a bond measure. We're working at May of 2017 to do that. We understand our local needs, and our local commitment needs to be to support our fire district. But as the Citygate study says, the small rural fire districts, which is what each of these are, don't have the ability to raise the kind of money necessary to run a fire station. A fire station costs the same if it's in Sac Metro or Roseville. It's about $1.2 to $1.7 million. And these small rural districts just can't raise that. In Penryn alone, it would be a tax of $629 a year for our residents to fully support our fire district. Help me get that passed, and you'll be heroes. We'll put statues up to you, any of you that can do that. It just is too high. We need help. And we're asking the county for its help. We're willing to sit down. We ask you to set up a workshop, give staff direction to meet with us. Now that the Citygate study is there, it's on the table, let's talk solutions. There are an awful lot of bright people on my committee and an awful lot of bright people here and on county staff. We can achieve a solution, but we need to work together. We're all on the same page for public safety's sake. You don't want to see fire districts fail. We don't want to fail. So we're asking for your help. We're asking to partner with you, the board, and county staff in going through the Citygate report and making the best we can of it. But we need money now, $3.6 million, and we'd ask that you add that to the request now, and let's see if there's some way we can get all of that, or at least a large portion of that, so these districts can maintain and keep going. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have or take any comments you'd like to give me.
I don't see any. Thank you.
Actually, I did have one question. Can you identify for me how that $3.6 million would be allocated among the districts?
The fire districts went through their budgets as part of our committee process, and they analyzed what they needed to break even to get to where they didn't have deficit funding, and that's where the figure comes from.
Right, but could you tell me by district what each district?
I don't have, it's approximately $600,000 a district, but it varies a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
To preserve the 3 districts that are going out of business, it would be $1.8 million. Those are the 3 most critical districts that need your help now, before the end of this fiscal year.
Here's my concern.
Yes, sir.
You know, if I gave you $3.6 million now, what leverage do I have to get, things done that we need with regards to this study?
Well, I think that's, as I said, it's a Band-Aid. That 3.6 is a Band-Aid.
I've just taken away all my leverage for these discussions.
I don't think you need leverage, sir. I think what
I
you
hope
need is
not.
our cooperation. And I think what you need is our commitment to work honestly through the City Gate study, our commitment to the changes that we together as a group can come up with through the City Gate study. I think we can come up with the kinds of things you're talking about to protect the taxpayer dollars. That's what this is all about. We're all protecting taxpayer dollars. We want to be sure it's spent properly. And if anybody can point out in these fire districts, after all their cuts and all the things they've had to trim back, where they're misusing money, I'll be the first one to be on your side. But the 3.6 is the Band-Aid that gets us through the study period, and then let's hope, and we're hoping that that then comes up with a more creative solution. We're not going to say, oh, you gave us some money, see you later.
Forgive me, it's just the lawyer in me.
I'm a lawyer too, so. You know, I appreciate what you're saying, and there's truth
And I'm
to
sorry
it.
if we need me to move on, but if I could maybe just wrap up from my perspective of my personal opinion as well as what I think I'm hearing from my colleagues, but keeping in mind that this very issue has been essentially emerging in the over 20 years that I've served on the Board of Supervisors, and essentially that is that, generally speaking, the smaller the fire district, the more difficult it has been experiencing financial stress every year, increasingly over time. And I think what the board has done, in my mind, is indicate that we're willing to try to find a permanent, sustainable solution, but not a Band-Aid. And over the years, there have been times when the districts together have somewhat attempted to work together with more or less success. And I think at this point, we're demanding that there be collaboration, cooperation, and an open attitude about looking at any and all solutions. And
I think we're committed to that. But the reverse is true, too.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So with that, I think we need to move on, but appreciate your comments.
We're committed to that, too. But the reverse has to be true, too. And so we're willing to talk absolutely and honestly and forthrightly and come up with what I hope would be a good solution for everybody. So thank you very much, all of you. I appreciate you listening.
I think it's the big day of giving.
Veronica Blake, CEO, Placer Community Foundation. Comments regarding the homeless area. We are in favor of the collaborative proposal between the sheriff, probation, and HHS. We think that that actually helps people experiencing homelessness and also addresses public safety concerns. Wanted to comment on gathering in. The board and staff leadership there have really stepped up. They've taken a leadership role by bringing stakeholders together to explore ways to improve services to those experiencing homelessness. A couple of months ago, they organized a trip to Mission Solano to see how a nomadic program could work in concert with shelter services that are more traditional. Donors at our foundation have been very impressed by all of their services and their strong partnership with the faith community. And as you haven't yet reached a decision point on the homeless shelter, it's important that we continue to invest in this program because it's in place and it's being utilized. I'd also just say that the Homeless Resource Council, Continuum of Care, and the HMIS initiatives have also been very active this year and are deserving of your support. But separate and apart from homelessness, as several of you have mentioned, there's this need to develop workforce housing. And at the most recent Economic Development Board meeting, Celia McAdams shared her presentation regarding the needed improvements for our transportation system. And in that presentation, she shared that 70,000 new homes would be built in the county in the coming years. And we're at a critical time and need to ensure that housing is built for our workforce. And while I can't claim to know how we're going to get this done, I do know we have to take the issue seriously, and I hope that the board will provide the necessary resources to work towards a solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, thank you for the opportunity to address you. Susan Farrington with the Homeless Resource Council of the Sierras. I would just like to concur with everything Veronica Blake just shared with you. And I'd also like to commend Supervisor Holmes and Supervisor Montgomery for addressing staff and asking for the consideration of including accessible housing as a component of any homeless issue. In this past, 9 months that I've been working with you on the 4 work groups started around the Marbut study, the affordable housing group has been probably the hardest to lead, but also we've come to really a good level of consensus that this is a problem that is large and to each and every one of us seems unattainable, but we have come to consensus that we can do this. We can only do it as a group. If each and every one of us takes responsibility for the fact that we must start today, it's the only way that we can succeed. We can make this effort worthwhile. I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to work with you, and I would very much appreciate any forward motion towards suggestions, creative suggestions, how we get beyond this temporary stage of housing homeless individuals and move towards permanency. Thanks again.
Chairman Weingarten, thank you very much, Board. Keith Dieterich again from the Gathering Inn. I'm obviously in support of the funding for the Gathering Inn. And I also want to reiterate again that the Gathering Inn is very much in support of a more comprehensive approach to homelessness, and you can count on us being a good partner in that effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'm glad I stuck around because I got a good education here. First of all, I want to say to all the past board members, I like what you did there, Andy. I'm a public employee. I'm 71 years old and I retired here. This is the best place to live in. We have the best retirement plan and we don't take it for granted. So on behalf of all of the people that are in our age bracket, you guys, way to go. Thank you. Now you see why I'm fighting for that tower. Not to go in.
Thank you. Anyone else? With that, we're going to go into closed session, but before we do that, and that I'm anticipating there'll be virtually no one in this room when we come back, I want to again remind everyone that we're adjourning the meeting today in memory of Kathy Lund, longtime public servant in Placer County. Jerry.
The board will now adjourn to closed session to discuss one item, a conference with real estate negotiators regarding a property in the city of Lincoln. The board has returned from closed session where they had a conference with their real property negotiators. They heard a report on the property at issue and gave direction to their real property negotiators. That concludes the closed session report.
Meeting is adjourned.